The dust hung thick in the August heat as three men in city suits stepped down from their wagon, legal papers already in hand. Martha Hale stood on the porch of the ranch she'd built with blood and 30 years of her life, watching them come like vultures to pick at what remained. At 55, she'd buried a husband, raised children who'd left for easier lives, and fought this unforgiving New Mexico land through drought, disease, and despair. Now the bank had come to take the last thing she had left. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and prepared to meet her ending with the same stubborn dignity that had kept her alive this long. Before we begin this story of second chances and unexpected salvation, if you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Martha's journey travels. And if this story moves you, hit that like button and stay until the very end. You won't regret it. The heat that August afternoon wasn't just uncomfortable, it was biblical, the kind that made the horizon shimmer and dance, that turned the air itself into something you could almost see, thick and pressing against your skin like a wool blanket. Martha Hale had lived through 55 summers in New Mexico, and she knew this particular quality of heat. It was the kind that preceded endings. She'd felt it the day her husband Thomas died, his hand going cold in hers while the same merciless sun beat through the bedroom window. She'd felt it the summer the well ran dry and they'd lost half the cattle, their desperate bellows echoing across the parched rangeland. And she felt it now, standing on the sagging porch of the ranch house, watching three men in unsuitable city clothes climb down from a wagon that had no business being here. The ranch spread out behind her like a promise half-kept. 2,000 acres of stubborn earth that gave up its bounty grudgingly, if at all. The barn needed paint and probably structural support. The fences were held together more by habit than nails. The cattle were fewer than they'd been in years, lean and wary. But it was hers. Every weathered board, every stone in the foundation, every fence post driven into the unforgiving ground, she and Thomas had put them there with their own hands. The lead man wore spectacles that caught the sun as he approached, turning his eyes into blank discs of reflected light. He carried a leather folder thick with documents, and he moved with the particular confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. The two men flanking him were younger, harder, with the look of men hired more for intimidation than paperwork. "Mrs. Hale," the man with spectacles said, stopping at the base of the porch steps. He didn't remove his hat. "I'm Gerald Whitmore, representing First National Bank of Santa Fe. I believe you know why we're here." Martha's hands were steady where they rested on the porch rail, though her heart hammered against her ribs like something trying to escape. "I know you think you're here to take my ranch, Mr. Whitmore. I also know I've got 2 weeks left before the final notice comes due." "Actually," Whitmore said, pulling a document from his folder with the practiced flourish of a stage magician, "due to the accumulation of interest and the addition of legal fees associated with this foreclosure process, the grace period has been adjusted. The bank has authorized us to take possession today." The words hit her like a physical blow, but Martha had learned long ago not to let men see her bleed. "That's not legal. Judge Morrison himself gave me until the end of August." "Judge Morrison is no longer presiding over civil cases in this county," one of the younger men said, speaking for the first time. He had a cruel smile. "Judge Carlson is, and Judge Carlson is very particular about respecting the bank's property rights." Property rights. As if this land hadn't drunk her sweat and tears for 3 decades. As if the ranch hadn't been paid for 10 times over in labor and loss, and the kind of persistence that made rocks seem soft by comparison. "I need to see those papers," Martha said, descending the porch steps despite every instinct screaming at her to hold her ground, to not give an inch. Up close, she could smell the pomade in Whitmore's hair, could see the softness of hands that had never done a day's real work. He handed over the document with obvious reluctance, as if even that small courtesy was more than she deserved. Martha's eyes, still sharp despite the years, scanned the legal language. There, buried in the middle of the 3rd paragraph, the clause about accumulated interest and administrative fees. It transformed her debt from something barely manageable into something utterly impossible. "This is theft dressed up in legal language," she said quietly, handing the papers back. "You're charging me for the privilege of stealing my home." "The bank is exercising its contractual rights, Mrs. Hale. Nothing more, nothing less." Whitmore tucked the papers away, then pulled out a second set. "If you'll just sign here acknowledging the transfer of property, we can make this quick and painless." The bank is even prepared to offer you 48 hours to gather your personal effects before you need to vacate. How generous, Martha said, and the bitterness in her voice could have stripped paint. 48 hours to pack up 30 years of my life. It's more than some get, the younger man said, and this time his smile was outright ugly. I've seen families get an afternoon. You should be grateful. Grateful. The word ignited something in Martha's chest, something that had been smoldering for years. Through Thomas's death, through her children's departure, through every casual cruelty and dismissal this country had served her since she'd stopped being young and decorative. I will not sign, she said, her voice low and level. And I will not leave. This is my land, my home. And if you want it, you'll have to drag me off it. Whitmore sighed as if dealing with a difficult child. Mrs. Hale, please be reasonable. You're a woman alone, past her prime, with no means to pay this debt. Fighting will only make this harder on yourself. Sometimes dignity means knowing when you're beaten. Does it? Martha asked. Because I'm 55 years old, mister. Whitmore, and I've been hearing about what I can't do, what I shouldn't try, what I need to accept since before you were born, and somehow I'm still standing here. The man on Whitmore's left shifted his weight, his hand moving to his belt where a billy club hung like a promise. Mr. Whitmore, maybe we should just— Now, there's no need for that, a new voice cut in, easy and unhurried, with the lazy drawl of someone who'd been raised where time moved slower. Not when everyone here is being so civilized. They all turned. A man on horseback had appeared at the edge of the yard, though none of them had heard him approach, a trick possible only for someone who knew how to move quietly across hard-packed earth. He sat easy in the saddle, one hand resting on his thigh, the other holding the reins with the casual competence of someone born on horseback. He was younger than Martha, maybe 40, maybe 45. It was hard to tell with men who'd lived outdoors all their lives. The sun had weathered his face to leather, carved lines around his eyes and mouth. But those eyes were sharp and assessing, taking in the scene with the kind of intelligence that made Martha's spine straighten unconsciously. This is private business, Whitmore said, his voice sharpening with annoyance. Move along. Well, that's interesting, the stranger said, swinging down from his horse with fluid grace, because I'm pretty sure I just heard you discussing the sale of property, and I happen to be in the market. He walked toward them, spurs chinking softly with each step. He wore working clothes, worn denim, a shirt that had been mended more than once, boots that had seen hard miles. But he carried himself with the kind of confidence that didn't require expensive cloth to prove itself. The property isn't for sale, Whitmore said through gritted teeth. It's being repossessed by the bank due to failure to meet loan obligations. Ah, but once it's repossessed, the bank will sell it, won't they? That's how this works. The stranger stopped next to Martha, and she caught the scent of leather and horse and sage. So really, you're just middlemen. The question is whether the bank gets the money today or next month. Whitmore's face was reddening in the heat. The debt is owed by Mrs. Hale specifically. It cannot be assumed by a third party without extensive legal proceedings. Can it? The stranger reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. He tossed it to Whitmore, who caught it reflexively. How much does she owe? Whitmore opened the pouch, and Martha saw his eyes widen at whatever was inside. With all fees and accumulated interest, $3,472. The number hit Martha like a fist. She'd known it was bad, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that stole her breath. $3,000. She could work the rest of her life and never see that kind of money. Count it, the stranger said calmly. Martha watched, feeling as if she'd stepped into someone else's dream, as Whitmore's hands began pulling gold coins from the pouch. He counted twice, his fingers fumbling, his face cycling through disbelief, confusion, and finally settling into frustrated acceptance. This is highly irregular, he stammered. I'll need to consult with the bank before I can accept payment from someone who isn't the debtor. The bank wants its money, the stranger said, his voice still easy but now carrying an edge like a knife wrapped in velvet. That pouch contains $3,500 in gold coin. Take it back to your bosses and tell them the debt is satisfied. Or refuse it, and I'll ride into Santa Fe myself and have a conversation with the bank president about why his employees are turning down legal tender to settle a debt. Your choice. The silence stretched out, broken only by the restless shifting of horses and the eternal whisper of wind across the rangeland. Martha could see the calculation happening behind Whitmore's eyes, the weighing of protocols against results, the risk of returning to the bank empty-handed versus the irregularity of the situation. Finally, Whitmore pulled a receipt book from his jacket. "I'll need documentation. Full names, witnesses, signatures." "Of course," the stranger said. "I'm Cole Braddock, and I'm more than happy to sign whatever you need." The next 15 minutes passed in a blur of paperwork and signatures. Martha stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to process what was happening. Cole Braddock. She didn't know that name, had never seen his face before today. Yet here he was, casually handing over a fortune to save a ranch that wasn't his, to help a woman he'd never met. When it was done, when Whitmore and his men had climbed back into their wagon with the pouch of gold, when the dust of their departure had begun to settle, Martha finally found her voice. "Why?" It came out barely above a whisper. "Why would you do that?" Cole turned to look at her, and his eyes were kind but not pitying, a distinction Martha had learned to recognize immediately. "Seemed like the thing to do," he said. "Besides, I've been looking for a place to settle. Good land is hard to find." "Good land?" Martha let out a laugh that was half sob. "Mr. Braddock, this land fights back. It takes everything you've got and then asks for more. The well runs shallow, the grass is sparse. The winters will freeze you and the summers will cook you. Good land is not what you just bought yourself into." "Maybe," Cole said, looking out across the ranch with an expression Martha couldn't quite read. "Or maybe it's land that's been waiting for someone who understands that the best things are the ones you have to fight for." Martha shook her head, taking a step back. The shock was wearing off, and in its place came suspicion, cold and familiar. She'd been a woman alone too long, had seen too many men offer help that came with invisible chains attached. "What do you want?" she asked bluntly. "Men don't hand over fortunes out of kindness, so what's the price? The ranch? A share of whatever profit comes? Or is it something else entirely?" Cole's expression didn't change. "How about we start with some water for my horse and a conversation in the shade? It's too damn hot to negotiate terms while standing in the sun." "I haven't agreed to negotiate anything." "True enough, but you also haven't told me to leave." He gathered his horse's reins. "I'm going to put Ranger here in your barn, get him some water. Then I'll come back and we'll talk. If you decide you want me gone after that, I'll go. Fair?" Martha hesitated, then gave a short nod. She watched him lead his horse toward the barn, moving with the kind of ease that spoke of a lifetime around animals. Only when he'd disappeared inside did she allow herself to sink down onto the porch steps, her legs suddenly unreliable. Her hands were shaking. Now that the immediate crisis had passed, her body was reminding her that she'd just survived something that should have destroyed her. The ranch was saved, but at what cost? And saved for what? She had no idea who Cole Braddock was, what he wanted, or why he'd chosen this particular moment to ride into her life with a solution that seemed too perfect to be real. She pressed her palms against the weathered wood of the step, feeling the splinters and rough grain that had absorbed 30 years of weather. This porch had held her weight through joy and grief, through the early years when the ranch was new and full of promise, through the slow decline after Thomas died. She knew every board, every nail, every place where the wood had started to rot. The barn door opened, and Cole emerged, walking back toward the house with that same unhurried gait. He'd removed his hat, and she could see that his hair was dark brown shot through with silver, worn longer than was fashionable, but shorter than vain. "Nice barn," he said, climbing the steps to sit beside her. "Not too close," she noted, leaving a respectful distance. "Structure's solid. Roof needs some work, but nothing that can't be fixed." "Everything here needs work," Martha said, "including me." Cole smiled at that, a quick flash of humor that transformed his weathered face. "I doubt that. Woman who can stare down bank agents the way you just did doesn't need much fixing." I was about to lose everything. "But you didn't. And you didn't beg, didn't cry, didn't play weak. You stood your ground." He stretched his legs out, boots scuffing against the porch. "That's not something that needs fixing. That's something worth building on." Martha turned to look at him directly. "You still haven't answered my question. What do you want?" Cole was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting out over the ranch. When he spoke, his voice had lost some of its easy humor. I'm 43 years old, Mrs. Hale. I've spent my whole life moving, cattle drives, ranch work, whatever job needed doing. I've made money and lost it, saved it and spent it. And somewhere along the way, I realized I was getting too old to keep living out of a saddlebag. So you want a ranch? I want a home, he corrected gently. There's a difference. I've worked on a dozen ranches, maybe more, but they were never mine. I was always hired help, always temporary. I want something permanent, something I can build instead of just maintain. You could have bought your own place for that money, started fresh somewhere easier. Maybe, but I've learned that the easy things don't tend to last. And when I rode up and saw you facing down those men, he paused, seemed to choose his words carefully. I saw someone who understands the difference between owning land and earning it. That's rare. Martha's throat tightened. Pretty words, Mr. Braddock. But words don't tell me what happens next. Do you own my ranch now? Am I working for you? Living here on your charity? No, Cole said firmly. Here's what I'm thinking, and you tell me if it sounds fair. We become partners, equal partners. I put up the money to clear the debt and fund operations. You bring the land, the knowledge, and the work you've already done. We split everything 50-50, profit, loss, decisions, all of it. Equal partners, Martha repeated, tasting the words, testing them for traps. I've never heard of a partnership between a man and a woman that stayed equal for long. Then we'll put it in writing, legal and binding. Cole's voice was steady, serious. I don't want a ranch hand, Mrs. Hale. I don't want someone to take orders or look pretty on a porch. I want a partner who knows this land, who survived what it takes to make it work. Someone with skin in the game. Martha stood abruptly, pacing to the edge of the porch. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to grab this lifeline with both hands before it disappeared like morning mist. But the other part, the part that had been burned before, that had learned caution through hard experience, held her back. Why me? She asked, her back to him. Why this ranch? You could have gone anywhere, partnered with anyone. Young men with strong backs, widows with prettier faces, land that doesn't fight back at every turn. Why here? She heard him stand, heard his boots against the porch boards as he came to stand beside her. Not touching, but close enough that she could feel the solid reality of his presence. You want the truth? Cole asked quietly. I've been looking for 2 years, riding from town to town, checking out properties, meeting owners. And everywhere I went, I saw the same thing, people who'd given up. Oh, they were still going through the motions, still working the land. But the spark was gone. They were just waiting for the end, whether they admitted it or not. He gestured toward the ranch, toward the barn and corrals and distant pastures. This place should be dead. By every logical measure, it should have failed years ago. The well's shallow, the grass is thin, the market's been terrible, but it's still here, still functioning, still fighting, and the only reason for that is you. Martha felt something crack in her chest, some wall she'd built to protect herself from hope. It's not enough. Being stubborn isn't the same as being successful. Isn't it? Cole challenged. Success isn't about easy wins, Mrs. Hale. It's about getting knocked down and getting back up, about facing impossible odds and finding a way through anyway. You've been doing that for years, all alone. Imagine what you could do with help. Real help. A partner instead of hired hands who'll leave the minute something better comes along. Martha closed her eyes, feeling the afternoon sun on her face, the wind in her hair. She thought about Thomas, about the dreams they'd had when they first started this ranch. She thought about her children, scattered now to easier lives in cities she'd never see. She thought about the long, lonely years since Thomas died, fighting to keep this place alive through sheer force of will. And she thought about the alternative, signing Whitmore's papers, packing her life into a wagon, leaving this place to strangers who'd probably run it into the ground within a year. It has to be legal, she said, opening her eyes but still not looking at him. Everything in writing, ownership shares, decision-making authority, division of profit and debt. I want a lawyer to draw it up, one I choose, not someone you bring. Agreed. I make the decisions about the horses. That's non-negotiable. I've been breeding horses here for 15 years, and I know what I'm doing. Makes sense. I know cattle. You know horses. We each handle what we're good at. Martha finally turned to face him. And if this doesn't work? If we try this partnership and it fails, Cole met her gaze steadily. Then we fail honest. No secrets, no deception. We work until we can't work anymore. And if the land beats us, at least we'll know we gave it everything. That's not very reassuring. It's honest. I won't lie to you, Mrs. Hale. I won't promise you easy success or guarantee it'll all work out perfect. But I will promise you this. I'll show up every day. I'll pull my weight, and I'll treat you like the partner you are. Not like a woman who needs protecting, not like a charity case, but like someone whose opinion matters as much as mine. Martha searched his face, looking for the lie, the angle, the hidden clause that would reveal this was all too good to be true. But all she saw was a weather-beaten cowboy with tired eyes and work-worn hands, offering her something she'd stopped believing existed: respect. "All right," she said, and the word felt like stepping off a cliff into empty air. "We'll try it. But I want everything in writing before you move a single belonging onto this property. And I want time to think about the terms, to make sure I'm not agreeing to something that'll come back to bite me." "Fair enough." Cole extended his hand. "Partners?" Martha looked at his hand for a long moment, calloused, scarred, marked by labor. A hand that matched her own. She reached out and took it, feeling the firm grip, the strength tempered by control. "Partners," she agreed, "at least on a trial basis." Cole's smile was genuine, reaching his eyes. "I'll take it. Now, if it's not too forward, I'm going to suggest we get out of this heat before we both cook. You got coffee in that house?" "I do. Though fair warning, it's strong enough to stand a spoon in." "Best kind," Cole said, and for the first time since Thomas died, Martha let a man into her home without fear weighing on her heart. The kitchen was cooler, shaded by the overhanging porch roof. Martha moved through the familiar space, pulling out the coffee pot, setting it to boil on the stove. Cole sat at the rough wooden table, the same table where she'd fed her family for decades, where she'd sat alone for years now. "How'd you know?" she asked, measuring coffee grounds with practiced efficiency. "About the foreclosure, I mean. Were you just passing through, or did you come here specifically?" "Specifically," Cole admitted. "I heard in town that the bank was moving on your property. Asked around, got the story. A widow woman trying to hold on to her ranch, too proud to ask for help. Figured I'd ride out, take a look." "And you liked what you saw?" Martha couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "I saw potential. And I saw you." He leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. "I meant what I said before. Most people I've met are defeated before they even start. They look at hard work and see a burden instead of an opportunity. You're different." Martha poured water into the pot, set it on the stove. "I'm stubborn. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because from where I'm sitting, stubborn is exactly what this place needs." Cole gestured toward the window, toward the ranch beyond. "What's your assessment? Real honest. What shape is everything in?" It was a test, Martha realized. He wanted to know if she'd sugarcoat the truth or face it head on. She decided to give him honesty, raw and unvarnished. "The barn needs a new roof before winter. The north pasture fence is held together with wire and prayer. I've got about 40 head of cattle left, down from 100 2 years ago. Had to sell off most of the herd just to make loan payments. The well's reliable but shallow. It'll serve us and the animals, but there's no spare water for irrigation or expansion." She pulled 2 tin cups from the shelf, set them on the table. "I've got 5 breeding mares and a stallion. The stallion's getting old, but he's still viable. The mares are good stock, hardy enough to survive out here, smart enough to be trainable. I've been selling foals when I can, but the market's been soft. Haven't had a buyer in 8 months." "What about winter feed?" "Short. I'll need to buy hay, assuming the money's there. And we'll need to make some hard decisions about culling the cattle herd down to what we can actually sustain through the cold months." Cole nodded, his expression thoughtful, but not discouraged. "What would you do if you had the resources? If money wasn't the limiting factor?" Martha poured coffee into both cups, the rich, bitter smell filling the kitchen. She sat down across from him, wrapping her hands around the warm tin. "I'd fix the infrastructure first," she said, the words coming easily because she'd thought about this 1,000 times during sleepless nights. "Barn, fences, maybe a second well if we could manage it. Then I'd rebuild the cattle herd slowly, buy young stock, breed them up rather than buying full grown. It's slower, but more sustainable." "And the horses?" "The horses are different. They're not just livestock to me." Martha took a sip of coffee. feeling the heat and bitterness ground her. A good horse is worth 10 cattle in the right market, but it takes time, patience, and skill to breed quality. I'd expand the breeding program, maybe bring in a new stallion to diversify the bloodlines. Focus on horses suited for ranch work, smart, tough, reliable. Sounds like you've got a plan. Had a plan. Having resources to execute it is different. Martha met his eyes over her coffee cup. You said you know cattle. What's your experience? 25 years of it. Started as a kid on my father's place in Texas. Worked my way up from mucking stalls to trail boss. I've done drives from Texas to Kansas, worked roundups, managed breeding programs. I know how to buy stock, how to read weather, how to predict market trends. He paused. I also know when to cut your losses and when to hold steady. That matters out here. It does, Martha agreed. The coffee was doing its job, bringing her back to herself, settling the adrenaline that had been coursing through her since the bank agents arrived. What happened to your father's ranch? Something flickered across Cole's face, old pain, carefully controlled. He lost it. Not to the bank, but to bad decisions. Started gambling, drinking. By the time I was 20, there was nothing left to inherit. I worked other people's ranches after that, saved what I could. Never quite trusted myself to try again until now. The honesty surprised her. Most men would have hidden that kind of failure, dressed it up as something noble. Why now? She asked. Because I'm tired, Cole said simply. Tired of moving, tired of temporary, tired of being 43 years old with nothing to show for it but some money in a bank and muscles that ache more every winter. And maybe because I finally found something worth the risk. This broken down ranch? This ranch that refuses to die despite everything trying to kill it. Cole drained his coffee cup. And the woman who kept it alive. Martha looked away, uncomfortable with the compliment, with the weight of his regard. She wasn't used to being seen as capable anymore. Thomas had seen her that way once, but he'd been dead for 5 years. Her children saw her as an obligation, a burden they'd escaped by moving to the cities. The townspeople saw her as a relic, a stubborn old woman clinging to a lost cause. But Cole looked at her and saw a partner. It was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. I'll need some time, she said finally, to get the legal papers drawn up, to think through the partnership terms. A week, maybe 2. Take what you need. I'll stay in town until everything's settled. Cole stood, carried his cup to the basin. But if you're agreeable, I'd like to ride out here during that time. Look over the ranch, start making plans. Won't touch anything, won't make changes. Just want to understand what we're working with. That seems reasonable, Martha said, also standing. Her body ached, the tension of the day catching up with her all at once. Cole, why did you really do this? And don't tell me it was just good business sense. Nobody risks that kind of money on a maybe. Cole turned to face her, and in the dimness of the kitchen, his eyes were serious. I told you, I've been looking for a home, but there's more to it than that. When I rode up today and saw you standing there, facing down those men with nothing but your backbone to rely on, I saw something I've been missing my whole life. Courage that isn't about winning. Courage that's just about refusing to quit. He moved toward the door, then paused. My father gave up when things got hard. He took the easy path, the bottle, the gambling, the slow surrender. I swore I'd never be like that. And when I saw you today, I saw someone who'd made the same promise and actually kept it. That's worth investing in, Mrs. Hale. That's worth betting everything on. After he left, after the sound of his horse's hoofbeats had faded into the afternoon stillness, Martha stood in her kitchen and allowed herself, for the first time in years, to hope. It was a dangerous thing, hope. It left you vulnerable, opened you up to disappointment and heartbreak. But as she looked around her home, at the table where her family had gathered, at the stove that had cooked 1,000 meals, at the window that framed her life's work, she felt something shift inside her chest. Maybe survival wasn't enough anymore. Maybe, with Cole Braddock's unexpected help, she could do more than just endure. Maybe she could actually build something again, something strong enough to last beyond her own lifetime. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the rangeland in shades of gold and amber. Martha walked out onto the porch and sat in the old rocking chair. Thomas's chair, worn smooth by years of evening contemplation. She set it rocking with a gentle push of her foot, feeling the familiar rhythm, watching her ranch settle into dusk. Tomorrow she would ride into town, find a lawyer, start the process of turning this unlikely arrangement into something legal and binding. She would negotiate terms, protect her interests, make sure this partnership couldn't be used against her. She would be careful, cautious, and smart. But tonight, just for tonight, she would sit in this chair and let herself imagine what it might be like to have a partner again, to share the burden, to split the decisions, to have someone who saw her as an equal rather than a problem to be solved. The ranch spread out before her, familiar and demanding, beautiful in its harshness. It had tested her, broken her, rebuilt her into something harder and stronger than she'd ever thought possible. And now, maybe, it would give her one more chance to prove that survival was just the beginning, not the end, of her story. Martha Hale rocked slowly in the gathering darkness, and for the first time in years, the future didn't look like an ending. It looked like a door opening onto something she'd thought was lost forever, possibility. The lawyer's office smelled of leather and old paper, and the man behind the desk looked at Martha over his spectacles with barely concealed skepticism. Samuel Porter had been practicing law in Santa Fe for 30 years, and his expression suggested he'd seen every kind of fool arrangement imaginable. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Mrs. Hale," he said, tapping his pen against the contract draft she'd requested. "You want a partnership agreement that gives you and this Mr. Braddock equal say in all ranch operations, equal share of profits and losses, and equal ownership of all assets acquired during the partnership term. That's correct? And you've known Mr. Braddock for how long exactly?" 3 days. Porter set down his pen with a sigh that said more than words ever could. "Mrs. Hale, I feel obligated to point out that this is highly unusual. Most partnerships of this nature have some provision for majority control, typically held by the party providing the capital investment. Mr. Braddock paid off my debt," Martha said evenly, "but I'm bringing 30 years of knowledge about that land, established operations, and livestock. That's worth equal standing." "Is it?" Porter leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "Because in my experience, knowledge doesn't hold up well in court when money's involved. If this partnership dissolves, you could find yourself with nothing." Martha had spent 2 sleepless nights thinking through exactly that scenario. "Then write it so I can't lose everything. If the partnership ends, I want guaranteed rights to remain on the property for the rest of my life, regardless of who holds title. And I want my horses, any that I owned before the partnership, and any bred from my original stock, to remain mine exclusively." Porter made notes, his skepticism shifting to something closer to grudging respect. "That's more practical. What about decision-making if you two disagree? We each handle our areas of expertise. He manages cattle, I manage horses. For major decisions affecting the whole ranch, we both have to agree. If we can't reach consensus, we bring in a neutral third party to mediate." "And who chooses this third party?" Martha had thought about that too, lying awake while the wind rattled her windows. "We each name 2 candidates. Those 4 choose a 5th. That person serves as arbiter." Complicated, but functional. Porter was writing faster now, his pen scratching across the paper. "What about personal conduct? Living arrangements? These partnerships can get messy when people are sharing close quarters." "Separate residences on the property," Martha said firmly, feeling heat rise in her cheeks despite herself. "Mr. Braddock will need to build his own dwelling or convert one of the outbuildings. Clear boundaries about personal space and conduct." Porter looked up at her, and something in his expression had softened. "You've thought this through." I've had to think everything through for 5 years, Mr. Porter. I don't have the luxury of making careless decisions." "No, I don't suppose you do." He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. "All right, Mrs. Hale. I'll draw up the contract with all these provisions, but I'm also going to include a clause requiring both parties to maintain separate financial records, to be reviewed quarterly by an accountant, and a provision for dissolution of the partnership with proper notice and fair division of assets. How long will it take? A week, maybe less if I push. But Mrs. Hale?" Porter fixed her with a serious look. "I've seen a lot of business arrangements in my time. The ones that fail usually do so because one party or the other has expectations that aren't spelled out in writing. Make sure you and Mr. Braddock are clear about what you're getting into. Everything that matters should be in this contract." Martha stood, gathering her bag. "Everything that matters to the business will be, Mr. Porter. The rest we'll have to figure out as we go." She walked out into the bright afternoon, her boots clicking against the wooden boardwalk. Santa Fe was busy with the kind of commerce that felt foreign to her now. Merchants calling out their wares, wagons loaded with goods, well-dressed women shopping with parasols to protect their complexions. Martha felt out of place in her working clothes and sun-weathered skin, but she walked with her head high. She'd learned long ago that confidence could compensate for a multitude of deficits. Mrs. Hale. She turned to find Cole leaning against a post outside the general store, looking as comfortable in town as he had on her ranch. He'd cleaned up, fresh shirt, hair trimmed, face shaven. But the changes were superficial. He still moved like a man more at home on horseback than on boardwalks. "Mr. Braddock, I didn't expect to see you here. Had some business to attend to. Ordered supplies, talked to a few people about cattle prices." He fell into step beside her as she continued down the street. "How'd it go with the lawyer?" "He thinks I'm a fool." Cole's mouth quirked. "Does he?" "He thinks any woman who enters into an equal partnership with a man she's known for 3 days is asking for trouble." "He might be right." Martha stopped walking, turning to face him squarely. "Are you having second thoughts?" "No," Cole said, meeting her gaze without flinching. "But I'd be lying if I said this was a safe bet for either of us. We're strangers trying to build something that most married couples struggle with. The odds aren't in our favor." "Then why are you still here?" "Because long odds don't mean impossible odds." He gestured toward a small cafe across the street. "You eatin'? I'm buying, and I'd like to discuss some ideas I've had about the ranch." The cafe was half empty, the lunch crowd having dispersed back to their various occupations. They took a table near the window, and a tired-looking woman brought them coffee and plates of stew without being asked. Small-town efficiency, Martha thought, everyone knowing everyone else's business and habits. "I rode out to the ranch yesterday," Cole said after the woman had retreated. "Hope that was all right. You said I could look around." "I did. What did you see?" "Potential." He took a sip of coffee, grimaced slightly at the weakness of it compared to Martha's brew. "That north pasture you mentioned, the one with the failing fence, I think we should forget about fixing it and instead use it for horses. Cattle need more range anyway, and horses do better in smaller, more controlled spaces." Martha considered this, turning the idea over in her mind. "The grass there is thin. Now it is. But if we rotate the horses properly, give it time to recover between grazing, it could improve. And being closer to the barn means easier management, especially during foaling season." "What about the cattle?" "I've been thinking about that too." Cole pushed his stew around his plate, clearly working through the logistics as he spoke. "We don't have enough range or water to support a large herd. But we don't need a large herd if we're smart about it. Instead of quantity, we focus on quality. Buy good breeding stock, raise them well, sell them at premium prices. That's a longer investment timeline." "It is, but it's also more sustainable. And if we're breeding quality on both the cattle and horse sides, we build a reputation. People will come to us instead of us having to chase markets." Martha found herself nodding, drawn in despite her caution. His thinking aligned with hers in a way that felt almost uncanny. "The well's the limiting factor. Everything depends on water. Which is why I think we need to drill a second well before winter. I talked to a man in town who does well drilling. He says there's likely water about 30 feet down on the south end of your property, near that rock outcropping. That would cost a fortune." "It would cost about $400, according to his estimate, which is expensive but not impossible." Cole finally looked up from his plate, his eyes serious. "Martha, we can't build anything sustainable if we're always limited by the same constraints that nearly killed this ranch before. We need to invest in infrastructure, even if it hurts in the short term." The use of her first name should have felt presumptuous, but somehow it didn't. It felt natural, like they'd already crossed some invisible line from strangers into something more familiar. "And if the well driller is wrong?" she asked. "If we spend $400 and don't find water? Then we're out $400 and we adapt. But doing nothing guarantees we stay limited. At least this gives us a chance to expand." Martha took a bite of the stew, which was mediocre at best, using the time to think. Everything Cole said made sense. The ranch had been dying a slow death because she'd been forced into defensive management, patching holes, making do, never able to invest in real improvements. But the risk terrified her. She'd spent so long just trying to survive that the idea of gambling on growth felt reckless. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Fair enough. But Martha, Cole waited until she looked at him. At some point, we have to stop being afraid of losing and start trying to win. That's the only way this works. They finished their meal in companionable silence, the cafe slowly filling again as the afternoon wore on. Martha watched Cole from the corner of her eye, noting the way other men in the cafe regarded him, with the kind of respect that came from recognizing a fellow worker, someone who'd earned his place through competence rather than talk. The lawyer says the contract will be ready in a week, she said as they stood to leave, Cole dropping coins on the table. He's putting in all the provisions we discussed, plus some I hadn't thought of. Such as? Quarterly financial reviews, formal dissolution procedures, clear boundaries about personal conduct and living arrangements. Something flickered across Cole's face, too quick to read. Probably smart, though it feels a bit cold putting everything in legal language. Cold protects us both, Martha said. Feelings change, partnerships dissolve, but contracts keep things clear when everything else gets muddy. They walked back toward where she'd left her wagon, the afternoon sun slanting across the buildings and turning the dust golden. Santa Fe was beautiful in its way, Martha supposed, if you like crowds and noise and the constant press of humanity. She preferred the vast silence of the rangeland, the loneliness that at least felt honest. I'll be out to the ranch again tomorrow, Cole said, as she climbed into the wagon seat. Want to take measurements for that bunkhouse conversion? Figure if we're going to have separate residences, might as well make mine livable before winter hits. The old bunkhouse hasn't been used in years, probably full of mice and rot. Then I'll have plenty to keep me busy. He stepped back, tipping his hat. Drive safe, Martha, and think about the well. She did think about it, all during the long ride back to the ranch, all through the evening chores of feeding horses and checking fences and preparing her solitary dinner. The idea of drilling a new well felt enormous, like opening a door that could never be closed again. It represented commitment, investment, faith in a future she wasn't sure existed. But as she sat on her porch that evening, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Excitement. Not just hope, which was passive and fragile, but actual excitement about what might be possible. With water, with resources, with a partner who seemed to understand both the land and her stubborn refusal to quit, maybe the ranch could become something more than just a monument to survival. The next morning dawned clear and hot, the sun already fierce by the time Martha finished her breakfast. She was mending a bridle when she heard the sound of an approaching horse and looked up to see Cole riding in, a pack mule loaded with supplies trailing behind him. "Morning," he called out, swinging down from the saddle with that easy grace that spoke of a lifetime on horseback. "Brought some tools and lumber. Hope you don't mind me getting started on the bunkhouse. It's going to take more than one day's work to make that place habitable." "Good thing I'm not afraid of work, then." Cole began unloading the mule, stacking lumber near the old bunkhouse with practiced efficiency. "Though I wouldn't say no to some help if you've got the time." Martha set aside the bridle. "I've got time, but I'm not much for carpentry." Don't need carpentry skills to pull out rotted boards and haul away trash. That's mostly what today's going to be: demolition and cleaning. They worked through the morning in surprising harmony, their movements developing the kind of rhythm that usually took weeks to establish. Cole would pry loose a section of rotten wall, and Martha would be there to help carry it out. She would point out a section of sound timber that could be salvaged, and he would carefully extract it for later use. They spoke little, but the silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. By noon, they'd cleared out years of accumulated debris, old nests, broken equipment, the detritus of a working ranch that had slowly decayed. Martha found herself sweating despite the shade, her muscles protesting work they hadn't done in years, but it felt good, purposeful, like building instead of merely maintaining. "Break time," Cole announced, dropping onto a patch of grass near the water trough. He pulled out a canteen and took a long drink before offering it to Martha. She hesitated, then took it, trying not to think about the intimacy of drinking from the same vessel. The water was cool and sweet, and she drank gratefully before handing it back. "You work harder than most men I've known," Cole observed, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. "How long have you been managing this place alone?" 5 years since Thomas died, but I was doing most of the heavy work for a few years before that. He got sick slowly, first just tired, then weaker, then bedridden. By the end, I was running everything while taking care of him." That must have been hard. It was. But complaining doesn't change reality, so I just kept going. Martha stretched her back, feeling vertebrae pop. What about you? You said you've been working ranches your whole life. Never found a place that made you want to stay? Cole was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting across the landscape. Once, maybe. I was 25 working a big spread up in Montana. The owner had a daughter, and we had an understanding, or I thought we did. What happened? I asked her to marry me. She said yes, until her father made it clear I'd never be more than hired help. She chose the easy life over me, and I can't really blame her. I had nothing to offer but hard work and uncertain prospects. So you left. Seemed better than staying and watching her marry someone else. He took another drink from the canteen. Spent the next 18 years telling myself I was better off alone. But lately I've been wondering if I was just afraid to try again. Martha understood that fear intimately. After Thomas died, several men in town had made their interests known. Widowers looking for someone to cook and clean, younger men looking for easy access to land. She turned them all down, preferring loneliness to the wrong kind of company. This partnership, she said carefully, are you expecting it to become something more than business? Cole looked at her directly, his expression serious. I'm expecting it to be exactly what we make it. If it stays business, that's fine. If it becomes friendship, that's better. And if someday it becomes more than that, he paused. Well, I'm not presuming anything, Martha. I'm just saying I'm not closed to the possibility. I'm 55 years old, Martha heard herself say, the words coming out sharper than intended. I'm past the age where romance makes sense. Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, age has nothing to do with whether two people can build something meaningful together. Cole stood, brushing dirt from his pants. But like I said, I'm not presuming. Right now I'd settle for building a partnership that doesn't fall apart in the first month. Everything else can take care of itself. They went back to work, but Martha's mind kept circling his words. She'd spent so long seeing herself as finished, too old, too worn, too used up for anything beyond survival, that the idea of being seen differently felt foreign. Cole looked at her and saw a partner, maybe even something more. It was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. Over the next few days, the bunkhouse slowly transformed. Cole worked with the focused intensity of someone who knew exactly what he was doing, replacing rotted boards, patching the roof, installing a small stove for heat. Martha found herself drawn to the project, helping where she could, offering suggestions about layout and function. You've got good instincts for this, Cole said on the fourth day, as they hung a door he'd rebuilt from salvaged wood. Ever done construction work before? Built most of the chicken coop, some of the smaller outbuildings. Thomas handled the heavy carpentry, but I learned by watching and helping. Martha tested the door's swing, satisfied with how smoothly it moved. You learn to do a lot of things when you can't afford to hire help. That you do? Cole stepped back, surveying their work with evident satisfaction. Another week and this'll be livable. Not fancy, but solid. Better than fancy. Fancy doesn't survive winters out here. They were standing close, both examining the door's fit, when Martha became aware of Cole's proximity, the warmth of him, the solid presence, the way his shoulder nearly touched hers. She stepped back quickly, unsettled by her own reaction. I should check on the horses, she said, more abruptly than necessary. If Cole noticed her discomfort, he didn't show it. Mind if I come along? I'd like to get a better look at your breeding stock. They walked to the corral where Martha kept her mares, the afternoon sun painting everything in shades of gold and amber. The horses lifted their heads at her approach, recognizing her step, her scent, the particular way she moved around them. This is Sage, Martha said, running her hand along the neck of a dappled mare. She's my best producer, smart, calm temperament, good conformation. Her foals sell well when I can find buyers. Cole leaned on the fence, watching the horses with an assessing eye. What about the stallion? Thunder's in the far pasture. I keep him separate except during breeding season. Martha pointed to where a magnificent bay horse grazed alone, his coat gleaming in the sunlight. He's 16 now, still fertile but getting older. I'll need to replace him in the next few years. That's expensive. Everything about horses is expensive, but they're also where the real profit is, if you're patient. She climbed the fence to sit on the top rail, and after a moment Cole joined her. A good cow might bring $40. A well-trained horse can bring 200 or more. It takes longer, requires more skill, but the return is worth it. You really love this, don't you? The horses. Martha watched Sage nuzzle one of the younger mares, the gentle interaction speaking to the social bonds that made horses so different from cattle. Thomas bought me my first mare as a wedding gift. Said every ranch wife should have something that's entirely her own. I've been breeding horses ever since. Smart man. He was. Not always easy, not always right, but fundamentally decent. He saw me as a partner, not property. That was rare enough 30 years ago. Still is, I suppose. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the horses graze and interact. Martha found herself relaxing in a way she rarely did around people, her guard lowering incrementally. There was something about Cole's presence that felt safe. Not in the way of protection, but in the way of acceptance. He didn't try to fix her or change her or make her into something more convenient. The lawyer sent word, she said eventually. Contract's ready. We can sign it tomorrow if you want to ride into town. I want to, Cole confirmed. But Martha? Before we make this official, I need to know you're really committed to this. Not just going through the motions because it's better than losing everything, but actually willing to build something. Martha turned to look at him, this man who'd ridden into her life and offered impossible solutions. His face was weathered by sun and wind, marked by years of hard work and harder lessons. But his eyes were clear, honest, holding no deception she could detect. I'm scared, she admitted, the words feeling like pulling out a splinter. I'm scared of trusting you, scared of failing again, scared of hoping for something better and having it torn away. But I'm also tired of just surviving. So yes, I'm committed as I know how to be. Cole nodded slowly. That's fair. Because I'm scared too. Scared of disappointing you, scared of not being enough, scared of building something good and watching it fall apart like everything else I've tried to hold on to. But like you said, being scared doesn't mean we stop trying. No, Martha agreed. It just means we try scared. The next morning, they rode into Santa Fe together, the wagon rattling over the rutted road while their horses trailed behind on lead ropes. The journey took most of the morning, and they filled the time with practical discussions about ranch operations, carefully avoiding anything too personal. Samuel Porter's office looked exactly as it had the week before, but the lawyer himself seemed more energized. He spread the contract across his desk, pages and pages of careful legal language spelling out every detail of their partnership. I've included everything you requested, Mrs. Hale, he said, pointing to various sections. Equal ownership, separate areas of authority, mediation procedures for disputes, and your personal protections regarding housing rights and the horses. Martha read slowly, carefully, making sure she understood every clause. Cole did the same, occasionally asking questions that Porter answered with professional precision. It took over an hour to review the entire document. One thing I'd like to add, Cole said when they'd nearly reached the end. A provision that if either of us becomes incapacitated, the other has temporary authority to make necessary decisions until recovery or until a formal dissolution is required. Porter made a note. Sensible. I'll add language about medical incapacity and time limits. Anything else? Martha and Cole looked at each other across the desk, and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, that this was the moment everything changed. Once they signed, they were bound together legally, financially, their fates intertwined in ways that couldn't be easily undone. I think we're ready, Martha said. Porter prepared the final document with its additions, his pen scratching across paper while they waited. When he was done, he set out 2 pens and indicated where they should sign. Cole signed first, his handwriting surprisingly elegant for someone who worked with his hands. Then Martha took the pen, feeling the weight of it, the significance of the moment. With one signature, she was giving up sole control of the thing she'd fought so hard to keep, but she was also gaining something she'd never had before, a true partner. She signed her name in the careful script her mother had taught her decades ago. Congratulations, Porter said, witnessing their signatures and applying his seal. You're now officially partners in the operation of the Hale Ranch. May it prove profitable for you both. They walked out into the afternoon sunlight as partners, legally bound to each other's success or failure. Martha felt strange, almost lightheaded, as if she'd crossed an invisible threshold into unknown territory. Well, Cole said, offering her his arm to help her into the wagon. "I guess we'd better make this work, partner." Martha took his arm, feeling the solid strength of it, the reality of this man who'd chosen to tie his fate to hers. "I guess we'd better," she agreed, and despite the fear still coiling in her stomach, she found herself smiling. The ride home felt different somehow, weighted with new meaning. They weren't just two people anymore. They were partners, bound by law and contract, and the shared weight of everything they were trying to build. The partnership changed everything and nothing all at once. The ranch looked the same in the morning light, the same stubborn earth and weathered buildings, the same endless work demanding attention. But Martha felt different walking across that ground now, knowing she wasn't carrying the weight alone anymore. Cole moved into the bunkhouse on a crisp September morning, his belongings fitting into 2 saddlebags and a small trunk. Martha watched from the porch as he unpacked, feeling oddly domestic about the whole arrangement. She'd lived alone for 5 years, and before that had only shared space with family. Having a man on the property again, even one confined to his own quarters, felt simultaneously natural and deeply strange. "Coffee's on if you want some," she called out, and Cole looked up from arranging his sparse possessions with a smile that creased the weathered skin around his eyes. "Be there in a minute." They'd fallen into a routine of sharing breakfast before starting the day's work, a practical arrangement that saved time and fuel. Martha told herself it was simple efficiency, nothing more, even as she found herself making extra biscuits and frying more bacon than one person needed. Cole arrived carrying a folder of papers, settling into what had already become his chair at the kitchen table. "Had some thoughts about the well drilling," he said, accepting the coffee she poured. "If we're going to do it, we should start soon. Ground's still soft enough to dig, but once winter hits, we'll be stuck waiting until spring." $400 is a lot of money to gamble. It is, but I talked to 3 more people in town and they all said the same thing, that South Ridge has water. The rock formation's right. The vegetation patterns match other successful wells in the area. He pulled out a rough map he'd sketched. "If we hit water at 30 feet like the driller thinks, we could run a pipe system to serve both the house and the new cattle pens we'll need to build." Martha studied the map, impressed despite herself by the thought he'd put into it. "And if we don't hit water? Then we've learned something expensive about that ridge, and we focus our resources elsewhere." Cole took a sip of coffee, his expression serious. "Martha, I know you've been burned before. I know trusting feels dangerous, but we can't build anything meaningful if we're always afraid to invest." She knew he was right. The ranch had been dying precisely because she'd been forced into defensive thinking, never able to risk capital on improvements. But old fears died hard, and the thought of losing $400 made her stomach clench. "How much do we have in the account?" she asked finally. Cole pulled out a ledger, flipping to the most recent entries. "After buying supplies and paying the well driller's deposit, we'd have about $1,800 left, enough to get through winter if we're careful, buy spring calves, and handle emergencies." "That's tight." "It is, but it's workable." He closed the ledger. "I'm not going to push you on this. It's your decision as much as mine, but I think we should do it." Martha poured herself more coffee, using the time to think. Through the window, she could see the morning sun illuminating her land, the same view she'd woken to for 30 years. How many mornings had she stood here wondering if this would be the year the ranch finally broke her? How many times had she been forced to choose between bad options and worse ones? "All right," she said, the word coming out before she could second-guess herself. "We'll drill the well. But if it fails, we're not trying again. We accept the limitation and work within it." Cole's smile was genuine, lighting up his whole face. "Fair enough. I'll send word to the driller today." The drilling crew arrived 3 days later, 2 weathered men with a wagon full of equipment that looked both primitive and precise. Martha watched them set up on the South Ridge, their movements practiced and efficient, while Cole stood nearby answering questions and marking locations. "Never thought I'd see the day someone put money into this place again," a voice said behind her, and Martha turned to find her nearest neighbor, Frank Wilson, sitting astride his horse at the edge of her property. "Frank," she acknowledged, keeping her voice neutral. Frank had made his interest in buying her land clear over the years, his offers always just low enough to be insulting. "Heard you took on a partner," Frank continued, his eyes shrewd beneath his hat brim. "City fellow with more money than sense, according to the talk. Cole Braddock's from Texas, and he's got plenty of sense. More than most." "Maybe. Or maybe he's just a man who saw an opportunity." Frank shifted in his saddle. You be careful, Martha. Men don't invest in failing ranches out of kindness. He's after something, and when he gets it, you might find yourself worse off than before. Martha felt her spine stiffen. I appreciate your concern, Frank, but I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, you just handed control of your ranch to a stranger. That doesn't sound like good management. Sounds desperate. Then it's a good thing my choices aren't your concern. Martha kept her voice level with effort. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. She walked away before Frank could respond, her hands clenched into fists inside her pockets. The conversation shouldn't have bothered her. Frank had always been a small-minded gossip who measured worth in dollars and property. But his words had found their mark anyway, poking at the doubt she'd been trying to ignore. Was she desperate? Had she made a terrible mistake trusting Cole? The questions followed her through the morning's work, through feeding horses and mending tack and checking water troughs. By the time Cole appeared at the barn around noon, her mood had soured into something dark and uneasy. Driller says we should hit the water table by tomorrow, he reported, his expression pleased. He's confident about the location. Frank Wilson stopped by this morning, Martha said abruptly, not looking up from the bridle she was repairing. Warned me about partnering with strangers who might be after my land. Cole was quiet for a moment. And what did you tell him? That my choices weren't his concern. She set down the bridle, finally meeting his eyes. But he's not wrong, is he? You're a stranger. For all I know, you could be planning to wait until we've improved the property, then find some legal way to force me out. Instead of getting defensive, Cole leaned against the barn wall, his expression thoughtful. You're right. You don't really know me, and trust isn't something you can build in a few weeks, no matter how many contracts we sign. So what am I supposed to do? Just hope you're as honest as you seem? No, Cole said firmly. You watch, you verify, you stay sharp. Don't trust me because I say pretty words or because I saved your ranch. Trust me when my actions over time prove I'm worthy of it. He paused. And Martha, if you ever genuinely think I'm trying to cheat you, don't hesitate. Fight me with everything you've got. I'd respect you less if you didn't. The answer surprised her, puncturing her anger and leaving something more complex in its place. Most men would have been offended by her suspicion, would have demanded she trust them simply because they said she should. But Cole met her doubt head-on, accepted it as reasonable, even encouraged her vigilance. I don't know how to do this, she admitted quietly. How to work with someone, how to share control, how to let someone in after being alone so long. Neither do I, Cole said. I've spent 20 years being a hired hand, taking orders, never having real say in anything important. This partnership scares me as much as it scares you, just for different reasons. What are you scared of? Cole looked out toward the drilling site, where the crew was working steadily through the afternoon heat. That I'll mess this up. That I'll make a bad decision that costs us everything. That I'll prove my father right. That I don't have what it takes to build something lasting. He turned back to her. But I'm more scared of not trying, of getting to the end of my life and realizing I never took the chance when I had it. Martha understood that fear intimately. She'd spent the last 5 years simply surviving, never daring to imagine anything better. And now here was Cole, offering not just partnership, but the terrifying possibility of something more, success, stability, maybe even happiness. We should get back to work, she said, not because the conversation was finished, but because she needed time to process it. Those fence posts won't replace themselves. They spent the afternoon working on the north pasture fence, the physical labor providing a welcome outlet for complicated emotions. Cole dug post holes with steady rhythm, while Martha set the posts and tamped earth around them. The work was hard and hot, but there was satisfaction in seeing the new fence line take shape, replacing rotted wood with fresh timber. You're stronger than you look, Cole observed as Martha hefted another post into position. I've been doing this kind of work for 30 years. You build strength whether you want to or not. Most women wouldn't have stuck it out, would have sold, moved to town, found an easier life. Most women didn't have a choice, Martha corrected. They had to depend on fathers or husbands or sons. I was lucky enough to have a partner who saw me as capable, and unlucky enough to lose him before we'd really secured our future. So I kept going because the alternative was giving up everything we'd built together. Cole tamped earth around a post, testing its stability before moving to the next hole. You loved him, your husband. I did. Still do, in a way. You don't stop loving someone just because they're gone. Martha wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of dirt across her skin. But I've learned you can love someone and still move forward. The heart's bigger than we think. They worked until the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The drilling crew had packed up for the day, promising to resume at first light. Martha and Cole walked back to the barn together, tired and dusty, but satisfied with the day's progress. I'll make supper, Martha said, surprising herself with the offer. Nothing fancy, but better than whatever you'd throw together alone. I won't say no to that. My cooking skills begin and end with beans and bacon. She prepared a simple meal of fried chicken, potatoes, and greens from her small garden, the kitchen filling with familiar smells that felt almost festive after years of cooking only for herself. Cole washed up at the pump outside, then appeared at her door looking uncertain about the propriety of entering her home after dark. Come in and sit down before the food gets cold, Martha said, making the decision for him. We're partners, not strangers, and I'm too old to worry about what the neighbors might think. They ate at the kitchen table, the lamplight casting warm shadows across the worn wood. The conversation drifted from ranch business to more personal topics, Cole's childhood in Texas, Martha's early years building the ranch, the dreams they'd had and the ones they'd lost along the way. Did you ever want children of your own? Martha asked, then immediately regretted the question's intimacy. But Cole didn't seem bothered. I did once. Thought I'd have a whole house full, carry on the family name, all that. After the engagement fell apart, I told myself I was better off alone. Now I wonder if I was just protecting myself from getting hurt again. I had 3, Martha said quietly. 2 daughters and a son. They're all in cities now, Denver, St. Louis, San Francisco. They write occasionally, send money when they remember, but they made it clear years ago that this ranch wasn't their future. That must hurt. It did. Still does sometimes. But I can't blame them for wanting easier lives. This ranch has taken everything from me. Why would I want that for my children? She pushed food around her plate. Thomas and I built this place thinking we'd pass it down through generations. Instead, I'll probably die here alone, and strangers will take over once I'm gone. Not if we succeed, Cole said. Build this place upright, make it profitable, and it becomes something worth inheriting. Maybe your children don't want a struggling ranch, but they might want a thriving one. Or maybe they just don't want this life, regardless of how successful it is. Then we build it for us. Make it something we can be proud of, something that proves all the struggle was worth it. Cole met her eyes across the table. You've been fighting just to survive for so long, Martha. Don't you want to know what it feels like to actually win? The question stirred something in her chest, something that felt dangerous and exhilarating. Yes, she realized. She did want to win. She wanted to prove that all the years of struggle, all the sacrifice and pain and stubborn persistence had meaning beyond mere survival. I do, she admitted, but wanting and achieving are different things. Then we'd better get to achieving. The next morning brought the moment of truth. The drilling crew had been working since dawn, and by mid-morning they called Cole and Martha over to the site. The head driller, a grizzled man named Peterson, was grinning like he'd struck gold. Hit water at 28 feet, he announced. Strong flow, good quality. You've got yourself a well, Mrs. Hale. Martha felt her knees go weak with relief. She'd tried not to hope, tried not to invest emotionally in the outcome, but standing there listening to water bubble up from deep in the earth felt like witnessing a miracle. Cole's hand found her elbow, steadying her, his own relief evident in the way his shoulders dropped from their tense position. How much will it produce? Cole asked, his voice carefully controlled. Enough for household use, livestock, and irrigation if you're smart about it. This is good water, Mr. Braddock. Your gamble paid off. Over the next week, they installed the pump and pipe system, running lines from the new well to the house and the expanded livestock areas. The work was intensive and expensive, eating into their reserves, but watching fresh water flow freely from the pump felt worth every dollar spent. We should celebrate, Cole said one evening as they stood watching water fill a new trough. This changes everything for the ranch. How do you suggest we celebrate? We're nearly broke and winter's coming. We're not broke, we're invested. There's a difference. Cole pulled off his hat, running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. And I'm thinking a simple celebration. Good meal, maybe some of that whiskey I saw you hiding in the kitchen cabinet. Martha felt her face heat. That whiskey's medicinal. Sure it is, but tonight let's make it celebratory instead. They did celebrate, in their modest way. Martha prepared her best meal, roasted chicken with herbs, fresh bread, vegetables from her garden, and a pie made from preserved fruit. Cole contributed the whiskey and stories from his years on the trail, tales that made Martha laugh harder than she had in years. So there I am, Cole was saying, his third whiskey, making him more animated than usual, stuck on this horse that's decided it absolutely will not cross the stream. The rest of the herd's on the other side, the boss is yelling, and this stubborn animal is planted like a tree. What did you do? Got off, took off my boots and socks, and waded across myself. Figured if the horse wanted to stay there, that was his choice. Made it about 10 feet before that contrary animal followed me right into the water, like it had been his idea all along. Martha laughed, the sound feeling foreign but wonderful. Sounds like every horse I've ever known. They always have to think it's their idea. Like some people I could mention, Cole said, his eyes twinkling with humor. Are you suggesting I'm stubborn, Mr. Braddock? I'm suggesting you're selectively cooperative, Mrs. Hale. There's a difference. They grinned at each other across the table, and Martha felt something shift between them, a deepening of connection that went beyond partnership into something warmer, more personal. The whiskey had lowered her defenses, but underneath the alcohol was something real, something that had been building since the day Cole rode into her life. Thank you, she said quietly, the words carrying more weight than their simplicity suggested. For the well, for the partnership, for not giving up when I was suspicious and difficult. You weren't difficult. You were cautious, which is different. And you're welcome, but you don't need to thank me. This is as much for me as for you. Is it? Because sometimes I wonder why you really did this. You could have bought your own land, started fresh without all the baggage I brought. Cole was quiet for a moment, swirling whiskey in his glass. You want the honest truth? That first day when I rode up and saw you facing down those bank agents, I saw someone who reminded me of everything I wanted to be. Strong without being hard, stubborn without being stupid, capable of facing impossible odds without breaking. He met her eyes. I invested in this ranch because I believed in the land. But I stayed because I believed in you. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning that Martha wasn't quite ready to examine. She felt her heart beating faster, felt heat that had nothing to do with the whiskey spreading through her chest. Cole, I can't. She stumbled over the words, unable to articulate the confusion of feelings churning inside her. I'm not asking for anything, Cole said gently. Just telling you the truth. What you do with it is entirely your choice. They sat in the lamplight, the night pressing dark against the windows, and Martha felt the careful walls she'd built around her heart beginning to crack. She'd spent 5 years telling herself she was too old for romance, too damaged for new beginnings, too set in her ways to let anyone in. But Cole looked at her and saw not an aging widow, but a woman still vital, still strong, still worth knowing. We should get some sleep, she said finally, standing with the careful precision of someone who'd had just enough whiskey to feel it. Early start tomorrow. Martha! Cole stood as well, and in the small kitchen they were suddenly very close. I meant what I said, about believing in you. That's not going to change, regardless of what happens between us. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and watched him let himself out into the night. Through the window, she saw him cross the yard to the bunkhouse, his figure illuminated briefly by lamplight before disappearing inside. Martha cleaned up the dinner dishes with hands that trembled slightly, her mind replaying the evening's conversation. She'd been alone so long that the possibility of companionship felt foreign, almost threatening. But underneath the fear was something else, a tentative, fragile hope that maybe loneliness wasn't all she had left to look forward to. The next weeks passed in a blur of hard work and steady progress. With the new well operational, they expanded the cattle operation, buying young stock at good prices from ranchers looking to reduce their herds before winter. Cole's knowledge proved invaluable, his eye for quality cattle unerring. Martha watched him work with growing respect, seeing not just competence, but genuine passion for the craft. That red heifer, Cole said one afternoon as they examined their new purchases. She's going to be a good producer. Look at her bone structure, the width of her hips. She'll drop healthy calves for years. You sound like me talking about horses. Same principles apply. Good breeding stock is good breeding stock, whether it's got 4 legs or 2. They fell into an easy partnership, each handling their areas of expertise while consulting on major decisions. The ranch began to feel alive again in ways Martha had almost forgotten. The sound of cattle lowing in the pastures, the sight of horses running free in the north field, the constant activity of building and repairing and improving. But as October deepened and the first cold winds began sweeping down from the mountains, warning of winter's approach, Martha noticed Cole moving more carefully, favoring his left side slightly. She watched him wince as he climbed down from his horse one evening, saw him stretch his back with a grimace when he thought she wasn't looking. "You all right?" she asked as they finished evening chores. "Fine. Just sore. Not as young as I used to be. None of us are. But you're moving like something hurts." Cole waved off her concern. "It's nothing. Old injury from a fall years ago. Acts up when the weather changes. I'll be fine." But 3 days later, Martha was working in the barn when she heard a shout and a sickening crash from the north pasture. She dropped the harness she'd been mending and ran, her heart pounding, fear giving speed to her aging legs. She found Cole on the ground near the fence line, his horse standing a few feet away, looking confused and apologetic. Cole's face was white with pain, his left leg bent at an angle that made Martha's stomach turn. "Don't move," she commanded, dropping to her knees beside him. "Where does it hurt?" "Leg," Cole gasped, his voice tight. "Horse spooked at a snake, threw me into the fence post, heard it snap." Martha's mind raced through options, forcing down the panic threatening to overwhelm her. The nearest doctor was in Santa Fe, hours away by wagon. Cole couldn't ride, could barely move. And if the bone had broken through the skin, infection was a deadly risk. "I need to get you to the house," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Can you stand if I support you?" "I can try." It took 20 agonizing minutes to get Cole onto his feet and hobbling toward the house, his arm around Martha's shoulders, most of his weight supported by her smaller frame. She was breathing hard by the time they reached the porch, her muscles screaming, but she didn't stop until she had him inside and settled on the settee in the front room. "I'm going to cut away your pant leg," she said, pulling out her knife. "Need to see how bad it is." The break was clean, thank the heavens, no bone-piercing skin. But the leg was already swelling, turning purple, and Cole's face had gone from white to gray. Martha had set bones before, livestock, once a ranch hand who'd been kicked by a mule. But this was different. This was Cole, her partner, and if she made a mistake, he could lose the leg or worse. "This is going to hurt," she warned. "Can't hurt worse than it already does." She was wrong about that. Cole's scream when she pulled the bone back into alignment would haunt her for weeks. But she worked with steady hands, binding the leg with splints made from kindling wood and strips of torn sheet, her fingers remembering skills she'd learned from necessity over the years. When it was done, Cole lay panting on the settee, sweat soaking through his shirt. Martha wiped his face with a cool cloth, her own hands shaking now that the crisis had passed. "You should have been a doctor," Cole said weakly, attempting humor through obvious pain. "Doctors get paid better." Martha pulled a blanket over him. "You're staying here tonight. I'll sleep in the chair so I can watch for fever." "Martha, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. You're my partner and you're hurt, and I'm not leaving you alone in that bunkhouse where you could fall or need help or—" She stopped, hearing the edge of hysteria in her own voice. Cole's hand found hers, his grip weak but steady. "Hey, I'm all right. You fixed me up. I'll heal." "You'd better," Martha said fiercely, "because I can't run this ranch alone anymore. I need you." The admission surprised them both. Cole's expression softened, and he squeezed her hand gently before exhaustion pulled him under into uneasy sleep. Martha sat in the chair she'd pulled close to the settee, watching Cole's chest rise and fall, checking periodically for signs of fever. Outside, night settled over the ranch, bringing with it the familiar sounds of wind and distance. But inside, everything had changed. She'd admitted, finally, that she needed someone, that Cole had become more than just a business partner. And now he was broken, vulnerable, dependent on her for care. The ranch's recovery hung in the balance, but all Martha could think about was the man lying unconscious on her settee and the terrifying realization that somewhere along the way, she'd started to care about him far more than was safe or sensible. Dawn came too early, pale light filtering through the curtains to find Martha still in the chair beside the settee, her neck stiff from sleeping upright. Cole was awake, watching her with eyes that held both pain and something softer. "You stayed," he said, his voice rough with sleep and discomfort. "Of course I stayed." Martha stood, her joints protesting, and moved to check his forehead for fever. "Cool, thank everything." "How's the pain?" "Like a horse kicked me and then stomped on the pieces." He tried to shift position and immediately regretted it, his face going white. "How bad is it really?" "Clean break of the tibia, no compound fracture. You'll heal, but it'll take time. 6 weeks minimum before you can put weight on it, maybe 8. Martha pulled the blanket back to examine her handiwork from the night before. The splint was holding, the swelling marginally better than she'd feared. "You're going to have to stay off that leg completely. No walking, no standing, nothing that puts pressure on the bone." Cole's jaw tightened. "We can't afford for me to be laid up. Winter's coming, there's too much work." "The work will get done." Martha's voice was firm, brooking no argument. "I've been running this ranch alone for 5 years. I can handle a few more weeks while you heal." "That's not fair to you. We're partners." "Exactly. Partners. Which means when one of us is down, the other picks up the slack." She met his eyes. "You saved this ranch, Cole. Let me save you for a change." Before he could respond, she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Through the window, she saw Doc Pritchard's familiar rig pulling into the yard, and behind him, Frank Wilson on horseback. Martha's stomach sank. She hadn't sent for the doctor, hadn't had time, which meant someone had seen the accident and spread the word. "Stay quiet," she told Cole, then went to meet her visitors on the porch. Doc Pritchard was a solid man in his 60s, with hands that had delivered half the babies in the county and set more broken bones than he could count. He climbed down from his wagon with the careful movements of someone whose own bones ached in the morning cold. "Martha," he said, tipping his hat. "Heard your partner took a fall. Thought I'd better come see what damage was done." "Who told you?" "Young Henderson boy was riding past yesterday. Saw the whole thing from the road. Came straight to town." Doc Pritchard pulled his medical bag from the wagon. "How bad is it?" "Broken leg. I said it last night." Doc Pritchard's eyebrows rose. "You said it? Martha, that's a job for someone who was here, which you weren't." Martha kept her voice level. "The bone's back in alignment, splinted and wrapped, but I'd appreciate you looking at it to make sure I didn't miss anything." Frank Wilson had dismounted and was standing at the base of the porch steps, his expression a mix of concern and something that looked suspiciously like satisfaction. "Terrible thing, a man getting hurt like that, especially so close to winter, makes you wonder if maybe this partnership wasn't such a good idea after all." "Nobody asked for your opinion, Frank," Martha said coldly. "Just saying what everyone's thinking. You take on a partner, invest what little money you had left, and now he's laid up and useless. How are you going to manage the ranch work and nurse him back to health? You're not young anymore, Martha." Doc Pritchard shot Frank a disapproving look. "Why don't you make yourself useful and help me with my bag, Wilson? Mrs. Hale has enough to deal with without your commentary." Martha led Doc Pritchard inside, where Cole was trying unsuccessfully to look less helpless than he felt. The doctor set his bag down and began examining the leg with gentle, practiced hands. "Well," he said after a thorough inspection, "I have to say, Martha, you did a fine job here. Bones aligned properly, splint secure, no signs of infection starting. Couldn't have done better myself." "She should have sent for you immediately," Frank said from the doorway, where he'd stationed himself despite not being invited inside. "Woman's got no business setting broken bones. This woman's got more medical sense than half the trained doctors I know," Doc Pritchard said sharply. "And she did exactly what needed doing when it needed doing. Now, if you don't mind, Frank, this is between me and my patients." Frank left, but not before giving Martha a look that promised this wasn't over. She closed the door behind him with more force than necessary. "He's going to make trouble," Cole said quietly. "Let him try." Martha's voice was hard. "We've got a legal partnership, a working ranch, and no debt. What can he possibly do?" Doc Pritchard was mixing something in a small bottle. "Laudanum," he explained, "for the pain, small doses, and only when it gets unbearable. Too much of this and you'll be fighting a different kind of problem. He left detailed instructions about care, warning signs of infection, and how to prevent the muscle from atrophying during recovery. When he finally stood to leave, he put a hand on Martha's shoulder. "You're going to wear yourself out if you're not careful," he said kindly. "Running a ranch and playing nurse is too much for anyone, regardless of age." "I don't have a choice." "You always have choices. Pride just makes some of them harder to see." He picked up his bag. "I'll check back in a week. Send word if anything changes before then." After he left, Martha stood looking at Cole on the settee, her mind already racing through everything that needed to be done. The cattle needed checking, fences needed finishing before the first snow, hay needed buying and storing, horses needed training. And now she'd be doing it all alone while also caring for a man who couldn't even walk. "I can see you making lists in your head," Cole said. "Stop it." "Someone has to." "Martha, sit down for a minute." When she hesitated, he added, "Please." She sat, exhaustion suddenly overwhelming. She'd been running on fear and adrenaline since finding Cole broken in the pasture, and now that the immediate crisis had passed, her body was demanding rest she couldn't afford. "We need to hire help," Cole said. "Temporary hands to get us through until I'm mobile again." "We can't afford—" "Yes, we can. We have money in reserve for emergencies. This is an emergency." He shifted slightly, wincing. "There's a man named Jake Morrison who worked with me on a drive 2 years ago. Good hand, honest, knows cattle and horses both. He was working a ranch outside Santa Fe last I heard. If he's still there, I can send word." "How much would he want?" "Standard wages, $1 a day plus meals. Maybe 2 weeks' work to get us caught up and ready for winter." Martha calculated quickly. 2 weeks at $1 a day plus feeding him meant about $20 total. Expensive, but manageable. And if it meant the difference between keeping the ranch running and falling behind on critical work, it was necessary. "All right," she agreed, "but I'll be the one to interview him. Make sure he's actually as good as you say." "Wouldn't have it any other way." Over the next few days, Martha established a routine that left her collapsing into bed each night too exhausted to think. She rose before dawn to start coffee and make breakfast, brought Cole his meal along with fresh water and anything else he needed. Then she'd head out to tackle the day's ranch work, pushing herself through tasks that would have been easier with 2 sets of hands. She checked cattle, mended fences, fed and watered horses, cleaned stalls, and handled 100 other small tasks that added up to backbreaking labor. Around noon, she'd return to the house to check on Cole, bring him lunch, and handle any personal needs he was too proud to ask for help with. The intimacy of caring for him, helping him to the chamber pot, washing him when he couldn't reach, changing his clothes, should have felt awkward, but instead it felt natural, necessary, like an extension of the partnership they'd built. "I hate this," Cole said one afternoon as Martha helped him shift position to ease the pressure on his back. "Hate being useless, hate watching you work yourself to death, hate being the burden I swore I'd never be." "You're not a burden. You're healing." Martha fluffed the pillow behind his head. "And I'm not working myself to death. I'm just working. You've lost weight. I can see it in your face." "I'm fine." "You're exhausted." Cole caught her hand as she turned to leave. "Martha, this can't continue. You're going to break yourself trying to prove you don't need help. I've managed alone before, but you don't have to manage alone now. That's the whole point of partnership." His grip on her hand tightened. "Let me help you, even if all I can do is make decisions and give advice. Stop trying to carry everything by yourself." Martha sank into the chair beside him, suddenly too tired to maintain her defensive walls. "I don't know how to accept help. Every time I've depended on someone, they've either died or left or tried to use it against me. It's safer to just handle things myself." "Is it? Or is it just lonelier?" Cole's thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. "I'm not going anywhere, Martha. I'm stuck on this settee for at least another month. You might as well use me for something other than taking up space." Despite everything, she smiled. "You want to be useful?" Desperately. "Fine. The Henderson boy who saw your accident, his family has a ranch about 10 miles north. They might know if Jake Morrison is still in the area. Write me a letter I can take to them, asking if they'll pass word along." Done. "What else?" "I need to decide which cattle to keep through winter and which to sell before the market drops. You know more about market timing than I do." They spent the next hour going through the cattle inventory, Cole asking questions about individual animals, while Martha described their qualities and quirks. By the end, they'd identified 15 head that should be sold within the month and the rest that would form their core breeding stock. "See," Cole said when they finished, "I can still be useful, even flat on my back." "You were always useful, even when you're driving me crazy." "Especially when I'm driving you crazy. Keeps you sharp." Martha found herself laughing, the sound startling in its genuineness. When had she started laughing so easily around him? When had his presence become something she looked forward to rather than endured? Jake Morrison arrived 5 days later, a rangy man in his 30s with the weathered look of someone who'd spent his life outdoors. Martha met him in the yard, assessing him with the critical eyes she'd developed over decades of hiring seasonal help. "Ma'am," he said, removing his hat, "Cole Braddock sent word you might need an extra hand for a few weeks." Might need and actually need are different things. What's your experience? Grew up on a ranch in Kansas, worked cattle drives from Texas to Montana, spent the last 2 years as foreman on the Circle K outside Santa Fe. Jake met her gaze steadily. "I know horses, cattle, and general ranch work. I'm honest. I don't drink on the job. And I earn my pay." "Cole said you worked together 2 years ago. Tell me about that." Jake's expression shifted to something like respect. "It was a drive from San Antonio to Dodge City. Cole was trail boss. I was one of the hands. Hardest drive I ever did. Stampedes, river crossings that nearly killed us, weather that went from drought to deluge and back again. But Cole kept us together, kept us moving, and got every head of cattle delivered on time. That's when I learned what real leadership looks like." "And when the drive ended?" "Cole paid us fair, then disappeared. Heard later his father had died and left debts. Cole sold everything he had to pay them off, then went back to working other people's ranches." Jake shifted his hat between his hands. "When I got his message saying he'd finally gotten his own place, I was glad to hear it. Man like that deserves to build something." Martha made her decision. $1 a day plus 3 meals. You'll bunk in the smaller outbuilding. It's rough but weatherproof. Workday starts at dawn and ends when the work's done. I don't tolerate laziness, drinking, or foolishness with the livestock. Questions? "No, ma'am." "When do I start?" "Right now. Horses need feeding, and I'll show you which fences need finishing before snow hits." Having Jake on the ranch transformed everything. Martha still worked long days, but now she had someone to share the heavy lifting, someone who could handle tasks while she focused on the horses and the endless administrative work that came with running a business. Jake proved as capable as Cole had promised, working with quiet efficiency and asking intelligent questions when he needed clarification. "You've got a good setup here," Jake said one evening as they finished securing hay bales in the barn. Cole always did have an eye for potential. The potential was always here, just needed resources to realize it. And partnership. Jake gave her a knowing look. "Cole told me about the arrangement. Equal partners, everything legal and fair. That's rare out here. It's necessary. I won't be dependent on anyone's charity or goodwill." "Didn't figure you would be." Jake wiped his hands on his pants. "If you don't mind me saying, ma'am, you and Cole make a good team. He's got vision and experience, you've got knowledge and grit. That's a powerful combination when it works right." Martha thought about that later as she prepared dinner, the kitchen warm with cooking smells while Cole dozed on the settee and Jake cleaned up at the pump outside. They did make a good team, she and Cole. The ranch was proof of it. Fences mended, cattle thriving, horses trained and ready for sale come spring. In just a few months, they'd accomplished what she'd been unable to do in 5 years alone. But more than that, somewhere along the way, Cole had become essential to her in ways that had nothing to do with ranch work. She looked forward to their evening conversations, found herself thinking about him during the day, noticed details about his face and hands and voice that had no business occupying her thoughts. At 55, she'd believed herself past such foolishness. Yet here she was, feeling her heart race when his fingers brushed hers, feeling bereft when she left his side to handle ranch work, feeling a fierce protectiveness that went far beyond partnership. "You're thinking awful hard about something," Cole said, and Martha realized she'd been standing at the stove, wooden spoon forgotten in her hand, just planning tomorrow's work. Liar. But his tone was gentle, amused. You get this look when you're thinking about something that bothers you, all pinched between the eyebrows. I do not get pinched. You absolutely do. It's actually kind of endearing. Martha threw a dish rag at him, which he caught with his free hand, grinning. The simple domesticity of the moment, the teasing, the easy comfort, the shared space, struck her with sudden force. This was what she'd been missing all these lonely years. Not just help with the work, but companionship. Someone to laugh with, argue with, share the small moments that made up a life. "Cole," she said, setting down the spoon and turning to face him. "When you're healed, when you're back to full strength, are you planning to stay?" His smile faded into something more serious. "Where else would I go? This is my home now. Our home." "I need to hear you say it, that this isn't temporary, that you're not just helping me get back on my feet before moving on to something better." Cole set aside the dish rag, his expression intense. "Martha Hale, I have spent my entire adult life moving from place to place, never settling, never committing, always keeping one foot out the door in case things went bad. But from the moment I signed that partnership contract, I was all in. This ranch, this partnership, you. This is what I want. Not temporarily, not conditionally, just permanently." The words should have terrified her. Instead, they felt like coming home after a long journey. Martha crossed to where he lay, sitting carefully on the edge of the settee. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "I'm 55 years old, and I don't know how to do this. How to let someone in. How to trust that this won't end in loss and pain. I'm scared too. But Martha?" Cole reached up to cup her cheek, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "I'd rather be scared with you than safe and alone anywhere else." She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes against the sudden sting of tears. When had she become this person who cried, who felt, who allowed herself to be vulnerable? The old Martha, the one who'd survived Thomas's death and 5 years of brutal loneliness, would have pulled away. But this Martha, the one Cole had somehow called forth, leaned in instead. "When you're healed," she said, opening her eyes to meet his, "we need to have a serious conversation about what this partnership really is." "And what do you think it is?" "I think it stopped being just business the day you paid off my debt. Maybe even before that. I think we've been building towards something neither of us wants to name because naming it makes it real, and real things can hurt us." Cole's thumb stroked her cheekbone. "Then we'll have that conversation when I'm healed. We'll name it, make it real, and deal with whatever comes. Together." The sound of Jake's boots on the porch broke the moment, and Martha pulled away, standing quickly to return to the stove. But she felt Cole's eyes on her as she worked, felt the weight of promises made and possibilities acknowledged. Dinner that night was a companionable affair, the three of them sharing the day's work and planning tomorrow's tasks. Jake proved good company, with stories from his years on the trail and a dry wit that made even Cole laugh despite the constant pain in his leg. "How's the healing coming?" Jake asked, nodding toward the splint. "Slowly. Doc says another 4 weeks minimum before I can try putting weight on it." 4 weeks? Martha's head snapped up. "He said 6 to 8 weeks. 6 weeks from the injury. We're 2 weeks in already." Cole shifted uncomfortably. "Though at this rate, it'll probably be closer to 8. "Could be worse," Jake observed. "I saw a man take a fall like yours once. Bone came through the skin. Lost the leg to infection within a week." "Jake," Martha said sharply. "Not helpful." "Sorry, ma'am. Just saying Cole here got lucky." After Jake retired to his quarters and Martha had cleaned up the dinner dishes, she sat with Cole in the lamplight, neither of them quite ready for the day to end. 4 more weeks of you underfoot," she said, but there was no heat in it. 4 more weeks of me being utterly dependent on your kindness and patience." "I'm not patient. You are with me. I've noticed." Martha considered this. He was right. She'd been more patient with Cole's injury than she'd ever been with anything else in her life. With Thomas's illness, she'd been patient out of duty and love, but underneath had run a current of frustration and helplessness. With Cole, she felt only a fierce determination to see him whole again, no matter how long it took. "That's because you're trying," she said finally. "You're not wallowing or complaining or using your injury as an excuse. You're healing as fast as you can while still being useful. That's easy to be patient with." "I'm trying not to drive you crazy." "Too late for that. You drove me crazy the day you rode up and paid off my debt. I'm just learning to live with it." They smiled at each other in the soft lamplight, and Martha felt that same pull she'd been fighting for weeks, the desire to close the distance between them, to offer comfort that went beyond nursing care, to acknowledge what was growing between them with more than just words. But Cole was injured, vulnerable, and dependent on her care. Any move she made now would feel like taking advantage, and Martha had too much pride for that. So she stood instead, smoothing her skirt with hands that wanted to reach for him. "Get some rest," she said. "Tomorrow's going to be another long day." They're all long days. But Cole's eyes held understanding, acceptance of boundaries she was setting for both their sakes. "Sleep well, Martha." She left him there and climbed the stairs to her bedroom, but sleep was a long time coming. She lay in the darkness thinking about the conversation they'd had, the promises implied if not stated outright, the future that was slowly taking shape despite her fears. The next weeks passed in a blur of hard work and incremental progress. Jake proved invaluable, his steady competence allowing Martha to focus on the horses and the training that would make them valuable come spring. Together they finished the fence repairs, organized the hay storage, and completed a dozen other tasks that had been languishing for lack of time and labor. Cole's healing progressed steadily. By the end of the third week, he could sit up without assistance, could shift position without agony, could stay awake for longer stretches. Doc Pritchard's weekly visits confirmed that the bone was mending properly, though he cautioned against rushing the recovery. "Seen too many men put weight on a healing leg too soon and end up crippled for life," the doctor warned. "Another few weeks, Cole. I know you're itching to get back to work, but patience now means full recovery later." But patience had never been Cole's strong suit, and being confined while others worked grated on him more each day. Martha could see the frustration building, could hear it in the edge that crept into his voice when discussing ranch business, could feel it in the tension of his shoulders when she helped him shift position. "This is killing me," he admitted one afternoon when Martha came in to bring him lunch. "Watching you and Jake work yourselves to exhaustion while I lie here useless." "You're not useless. You've been managing the books, planning next year's operations, corresponding with buyers. That's valuable work. It's not the same as actual labor, and you know it." Martha set down the tray harder than necessary. "What I know is that you're healing. What I know is that if you push too hard too soon, you risk permanent damage. What I know is that your pride is making you miserable for no good reason." "My pride? This isn't about pride, Martha. It's about pulling my weight in a partnership. Then trust me to carry the weight for a while longer. Trust that I'm strong enough to handle it. Trust that this partnership doesn't fall apart just because you're temporarily down." "I do trust you, but—" He stopped, jaw working as he fought for words. "What if I can't come back from this? What if the leg doesn't heal right, and I'm left with a limp, with limited mobility? What good is a rancher who can't ride properly?" So that was it. Oh, that was not pride, but fear. The same kind of fear Martha had been carrying for years. The fear of being useless, unwanted, a burden rather than an asset. She sat on the edge of the settee, taking his hand in both of hers. "Cole Braddock, listen to me. You could have a limp for the rest of your life, and you'd still be the smartest cattleman I know. You could never ride again, and you'd still be invaluable for your knowledge and experience. You're worth more than just your physical labor. And if you can't see that, then you're not nearly as smart as I thought you were. Martha, I mean it. This ranch wouldn't exist without you. Not because you can lift heavy things or ride horses, but because you had vision when I'd given up hope. Because you saw potential where I saw only failure. Because you believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself." She squeezed his hand. "So stop measuring your worth by how much physical work you can do, and start recognizing everything else you bring." Cole pulled her closer, his hand cupping the back of her head as he pressed his forehead to hers. They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, sharing the same space, acknowledging without words the depth of what had grown between them. "How did I get so lucky?" Cole murmured. "Finding you, finding this place, finding a second chance when I thought I was too old for new beginnings?" "I could ask you the same question." They pulled apart slowly, reluctantly, both aware that Jake could return at any moment. But something had shifted between them again. Another wall crumbling. Another truth acknowledged. When Cole was healed, when he could stand on his own 2 feet again, they would have that conversation. They would name what this was and decide what came next. But for now, Martha had ranch work to finish and a partner to nurse back to health. She stood, straightening her skirt, forcing herself back into the practical mindset that had sustained her through so many challenges. "Eat your lunch," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside. "And stop worrying about things that haven't happened yet. The leg will heal, you'll get back to work, and we'll figure out the rest as we go." "Yes, ma'am," Cole said, and there was both respect and affection in his tone. Martha left him there and walked back out into the afternoon sunlight, her heart full of feelings she wasn't quite ready to examine. But underneath the fear and uncertainty was something else, a quiet, growing certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. And that made all the difference. The first snow came early that year, dusting the rangeland with white, while November was still young. Martha stood on the porch watching it fall, coffee steaming in her hands, feeling the season turn with that particular awareness that came from decades of reading weather and land. Behind her, she could hear Cole moving around inside. Actual movement now, not the helpless shifting of an invalid, but the careful steps of a man testing his healing leg. 6 weeks had passed since the accident. Doc Pritchard had removed the splint 3 days ago, declaring the bone mended though still fragile. Cole was under strict orders to use the crutch Martha had fashioned from a sturdy branch, to avoid putting full weight on the leg, to take things slowly. Of course, Cole being Cole, he'd immediately tried to do too much and had nearly collapsed from the effort. The argument that followed had been their worst yet, Martha's fear manifesting as anger, while Cole's frustration exploded into words he'd immediately regretted. But they'd worked through it, the way partners did. They'd talked it out that evening, sitting at the kitchen table while honest words passed between them like currency. Cole had apologized for his stubbornness. Martha had admitted her terror at the thought of him re-injuring himself. And they'd reached an understanding. Cole would follow doctor's orders, and Martha would stop treating him like he was made of glass. Now, watching the snow fall, Martha heard the uneven rhythm of his steps approaching. He came to stand beside her, one hand braced on the porch post for balance, his breath creating small clouds in the cold air. "Beautiful," he said, and Martha wasn't sure if he meant the snow or the land or something else entirely. "Jake finished moving the cattle to the south pasture yesterday," she said. "They'll be sheltered there when the real storms hit." "Good. And the horses?" "In the barn, fed and comfortable. We're as ready as we're going to be." They stood in companionable silence, watching the world transform. The ranch looked different under snow, softer, almost gentle, the harsh edges smoothed by white. But Martha knew better than to trust the beauty. Winter out here was beautiful and deadly in equal measure, and surviving it required constant vigilance. "I've been thinking," Cole said after a while. "Jake's contract is up in 2 days. We should ask him to stay on through winter. We agreed on temporary help until you were mobile." "I know what we agreed, but having 3 sets of hands makes sense, especially now. Winter work is unpredictable, storm damage, animals in trouble, supply runs when the weather breaks. And come spring, we'll need help with calving and foaling both." Martha considered this. Jake had proven himself a dozen times over, his competence matched by his integrity. He worked hard, complained little, and had an easy way with both animals and people that made him valuable beyond his labor. But keeping him on meant another mouth to feed, another wage to pay, another person on the ranch permanently. What if he doesn't want to stay? He might have other plans. Then we ask and find out. Cole shifted his weight, grimacing slightly. "But Martha, we need to stop thinking like we're barely surviving and start thinking like we're building something sustainable. That means investing in good people when we find them." He was right, though the shift in thinking still felt dangerous. For so long, survival had meant cutting costs, making do with less, never committing to anything that couldn't be undone quickly. But they weren't in survival mode anymore. The ranch was stable, profitable even. It was time to start building for the future rather than just defending against disaster. "I'll talk to him," she said. "See if he's interested." Jake was more than interested. When Martha approached him that afternoon as he was repairing a stall door, his face lit up with something like relief. "I was hoping you'd ask," he admitted. "I like it here. The work's honest, the pay's fair, and you two are the best bosses I've had. Plus," he added with a grin, "the cooking's about 1,000 times better than anything I can make. It's just plain food. It's home cooking, ma'am, That's worth more than you might think to someone who's been eating out of a saddlebag for most of his life. They settled on terms, the same daily wage, but with a contract through spring, with the possibility of permanent employment if things worked out. Jake would continue bunking in the outbuilding, which Cole had already promised to help winterize properly once he was strong enough for construction work. That evening, the three of them celebrated with Martha's best stew and the last of Cole's whiskey. The kitchen felt warm and full in a way it hadn't in years, voices overlapping in conversation and laughter, the sense of being part of something larger than individual survival. To partnership, Cole said, raising his glass. Both the legal kind and the kind that matters more. They drank to that, and Martha felt the truth of it settle into her bones. This was what she'd been missing, not just help with the work, but community. People who chose to be here, who invested in the ranch's success because it was tied to their own. After Jake retired for the night, Martha and Cole lingered at the table, neither quite ready for the day to end. The snow was still falling outside, steady and soft, coating everything in silence. "There's something I need to say," Cole started, then paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "These past weeks, being hurt, being dependent on you, it showed me something I'd been avoiding." Martha's heart began to beat faster, but she kept her voice steady. "What's that?" "That I'm in love with you." The words came out simple, direct, without embellishment. "I know we agreed to keep this professional, and I'm not asking you to feel the same way, but I'm tired of pretending what I feel is just respect or partnership or friendship. It's more than that, and you deserve to know." Martha sat very still, the words washing over her like water. Part of her had known this was coming, had felt the shift between them growing stronger with each passing day. But hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that terrified and thrilled her. "I'm 55 years old," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've got gray hair, worn hands, a face that's seen too much sun. I'm set in my ways, stubborn, and more comfortable with horses than people. What could you possibly love about that?" Cole reached across the table, taking her rough, work-worn hand in his. "I love that you stood up to bank agents when you had every reason to surrender. I love that you set my broken leg with steady hands even though you were terrified. I love that you work harder than most men I know and never complain about it. I love your strength, your intelligence, your refusal to accept defeat." He paused. "And I love that when you smile, really smile, not that polite thing you do for strangers. Your whole face transforms, and I can see the girl you must have been before life got hard." Tears were running down Martha's face now, hot against her cold cheeks. No one had spoken to her like this in decades. Thomas had loved her, she'd never doubted that. But their love had been forged in youth and circumstance, built on shared dreams rather than deep knowing. This was different. Cole loved her, not despite her hardness, but because of it. Not in spite of her age, but inclusive of everything those years represented. "I love Thomas," she said, needing him to understand. "I still do, in a way. That doesn't just disappear. I know, and I'm not asking you to forget him or stop loving him. I'm just asking if there might be room for something new alongside the old. I don't know how to do this, how to be vulnerable again, how to risk my heart when I know how much it hurts to lose someone." "Neither do I," Cole admitted. "But Martha, we're already risking everything, our money, our futures, our dreams. What's one more risk if it means we might actually be happy?" She looked at him across the table, this man who'd ridden into her life and changed everything. His face was lined with years of hard living, his hands scarred from work and weather. He wasn't young or particularly handsome, wasn't smooth or practiced in romance, but he was real, honest, and offering her something she'd thought was lost forever. The possibility of partnership that went beyond business into the realm of genuine companionship. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe and alone." Martha stood, moving around the table to where Cole sat. She cupped his weathered face in her hands, feeling the rasp of day-old stubble, the warmth of skin that had seen as much sun and wind as her own. And then, for the first time in 5 years, she kissed someone, tentative at first, then deeper as Cole's arms came around her waist, pulling her closer. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Martha rested her forehead against his. "This doesn't solve anything," she said. "We're still partners in business. We still have a ranch to run. I still need my own space and independence. I know. I'm not asking you to change who you are or how you live. I'm just asking if we can acknowledge that this partnership means more than what's written in contracts. It does, Martha admitted. It has for a while now. I've just been too afraid to say it. Cole's smile was brilliant, transforming his whole face. Then we'll figure out the rest as we go. No rush, no pressure, just two people building something together. They talked late into the night, the conversation ranging from practical matters to dreams they'd each stopped allowing themselves. Cole spoke of his vision for the ranch, not just profitable, but respected, known for quality cattle and horses both. Martha shared her hope of maybe, someday, having her children visit and see what she'd built, understanding finally why she'd fought so hard to keep this place. They might surprise you, Cole said. Success changes how people see things. What looked like stubbornness when you were struggling might look like wisdom when you're thriving. Maybe. Or maybe they'll never understand and I'll have to accept that. Either way, you'll have built something worth being proud of. That matters, regardless of who else recognizes it. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened in quiet, unhurried ways. They still maintained separate residences, Martha in the main house, Cole in the bunkhouse, both valuing their independence too much to rush into cohabitation. But they shared meals, shared work, shared the small intimacies that built real connection. Cole would rest his hand on Martha's shoulder as he passed. Martha would lean against him while they watched the sunset. Small touches, small moments, but each one felt like a promise. The ranch work continued through winter's arrival. With Jake's help, they weatherized buildings, moved hay as needed, checked cattle and horses daily for signs of distress. The new well proved its worth, providing reliable water even as temperatures dropped and lesser sources froze. The cattle thrived on the improved pasture, their coats thick and glossy. The horses were sleek and well-trained, ready for sale when spring buyers arrived. But the true test came in late December, when a blizzard roared down from the mountains with fury that seemed almost personal. Martha had seen bad storms before, but this one was different. Wind that screamed like something alive, snow so thick you couldn't see 3 feet ahead, cold that turned exposed skin white in minutes. They worked frantically to secure everything before the storm hit full force. Jake brought the horses into the barn, while Martha checked that every stall door was secure, every water trough filled. Cole, still limited by his healing leg, handled the easier tasks, filling grain bins, organizing supplies, making sure they had everything needed to wait out the storm. "This is bad," Jake shouted over the rising wind as they secured the last barn door. "Worst I've seen in years." "We're as ready as we can be," Martha shouted back. "Everyone inside now." They gathered in his main house, the 3 of them plus enough supplies to last a week if necessary. Outside, the world disappeared into white chaos. The wind hammered at the walls, found every crack and crevice, filled the house with drafts that made the lamps flicker. "The cattle," Martha said, pacing to the window for the 100th time. "They're in the south pasture shelter, but if the wind shifts, they'll be fine," Cole said, though his eyes betrayed his own worry. "That shelter's solid, and cattle are tougher than people give them credit for. The horses are in a barn we checked 3 times. Martha, you've done everything possible. Now we wait." But waiting had never been Martha's strength. She paced through the long hours of daylight, checking windows, watching for any sign of structural damage, her mind running through disaster scenarios. When one of the horses kicked its stall door hard enough to make the barn walls shudder, she was heading for the door before Cole could stop her. "Martha, no! You can't go out there. You'll get lost between here and the barn." "That's thunder kicking. Something's wrong." "Then we go together." Cole grabbed his coat, and despite Martha's protests about his leg, he was limping toward the door. "Tie this rope to the porch rail," he said, pulling a coil from the corner. "We'll use it to find our way back." They ventured out into the storm, the cold hitting like a physical blow. The rope was all that kept them oriented as they fought through waist-high drifts toward the barn. Inside, they found Thunder in a panic, eyes rolling white with fear. A branch had blown through a gap in the wall, striking near his stall and sending splinters flying. "Easy, easy," Martha murmured, approaching slowly despite the stallion's agitation. She'd raised this horse from a foal, knew his temperament, trusted their bond. "I'm here. You're safe." It took an hour to calm Thunder completely, to remove the branch and patch the gap it had created, to check every other horse for injury or distress. By the time they made it back to the house, following the rope through the blinding snow, both Martha and Cole were shaking with cold and exhaustion. Jake had coffee waiting, hot and strong, and they huddled around the stove trying to warm frozen extremities. The storm raged on through the night and into the next day, then another. 3 days total of white fury before it finally blew itself out, leaving the world transformed. When they finally emerged, it was to a landscape both beautiful and potentially devastating. Snow had drifted to unbelievable heights. Against the barn's north wall, it reached the roof. The fence lines had disappeared entirely under white, and in the distance, the south pasture shelter sat surrounded by snow so deep that reaching the cattle would require hours of digging. "All hands," Martha said grimly. "We dig them out, check for injuries, make sure they have food and water." They worked for 2 days straight, the three of them taking turns breaking trail through the drifts, digging out the shelter, hauling hay through snow that fought every step. It was brutal, exhausting work that left them all aching and frostbitten. But when they finally reached the cattle and found all but 2 had survived the storm, the relief was overwhelming. "We lost less than we had any right to expect," Jake said, as they trudged back to the house that second evening, their work finally done. "Most ranchers are going to lose a quarter of their herds or more in a storm like that." Martha's preparation made the difference, Cole said, his limp more pronounced after days of heavy labor. The shelter, the hay storage, the new well, all of it came together exactly when we needed it. That night, after Jake had collapsed into his bunk and the ranch had settled into exhausted silence, Martha and Cole sat together in front of the fire, too tired to move, but too wired to sleep. "We did it," Martha said wonderingly. "We survived the worst storm in years and came out intact. We did more than survive. We proved the ranch can handle whatever nature throws at it." Cole pulled her close, and Martha leaned into his warmth. "This partnership works, Martha. Not just in good weather, but in the worst conditions. That's what matters." The winter continued, but nothing matched that first storm's fury. They settled into routines shaped by weather and necessity, working when they could, resting when they must, building the kind of easy companionship that came from shared purpose and mutual respect. In February, Doc Pritchard made a final visit to check Cole's leg. After a thorough examination, he pronounced the healing complete. "You'll always have a slight weakness there," he warned. "Cold weather will make it ache, and you should avoid putting sudden strain on it. But for all practical purposes, Mr. Braddock, you're healed." That evening, Cole took Martha's hand and led her out to the porch despite the cold. The stars were brilliant overhead, sharp and clear in the winter air. "I can stand on my own 2 feet again," he said, "literally and figuratively, which means it's time for that conversation we've been avoiding." Martha's heart began to race, but she kept her voice steady. "What conversation?" "The one about what we are to each other, what we want to be." Cole turned to face her, still holding her hand. "I love you, Martha. I want to marry you, build a life with you that goes beyond business partnership. But I need to know if you want the same thing." Marriage. The word should have terrified her, should have sent her running for all the reasons she'd spent 5 years convincing herself she was better off alone. But instead it felt right. Not as rescue or necessity, but as the natural evolution of what they'd been building together. "I'm not easy to live with," she warned. "I'm stubborn and independent and set in my ways." "I know. I'm counting on it. And I won't give up my work with the horses or my say in ranch operations just because we're married." "I wouldn't ask you to. That's why we have a legal partnership contract, so we're protected regardless of personal relationship. And I want my own space sometimes, days where I can work alone, think alone, be alone." "So do I. We'll figure it out." Cole's grip on her hand tightened. "Martha, I'm not asking you to be something you're not. I'm asking if you'll be exactly who you are, permanently, with me." She looked up at him, this man who'd saved her ranch and somehow, along the way, saved her too. Not by rescuing her from hardship, she'd been doing that herself for years, but by offering her something she'd stopped believing existed. Partnership. Respect. Love that didn't demand she diminish herself to fit into someone else's idea of what a woman should be. "Yes," she said, and the word felt like liberation. "Yes, I'll marry you." Cole's kiss was deep and thorough, tasting of coffee and winter air and promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Martha was smiling so wide her face hurt. "When?" she asked. "Soon as we can get into town for a license. Unless you want a big ceremony with—" "No, just us, Jake as witness, and the justice of the peace. Nothing fancy, nothing prolonged, just legal and binding and real." "Sounds perfect." They married 3 weeks later on a clear March morning, with Jake standing witness and a handful of townspeople who'd come to see the widow Hale finally take another husband. Martha wore her best dress, not new, but clean and mended, and Cole wore the suit he'd bought for the occasion, looking uncomfortable but determined. The ceremony was brief, the vows simple, but when Cole slid a plain gold band onto Martha's finger and she did the same for him, something profound shifted. This ranch wasn't hers anymore, or his. It was theirs, legally and permanently bound together by commitment that went beyond business into the realm of shared life. The celebration afterward was equally simple. Dinner at the ranch with Jake, toast made with good whiskey, conversation that ranged from practical to profound. As the evening wore on, Jake excused himself with a knowing grin, leaving the newlyweds alone for their first night as husband and wife. "Nervous?" Cole asked as they stood together, looking out at the darkening land. "Terrified," Martha admitted. "But in a good way, like standing at the edge of something that could be wonderful if I'm brave enough to try." "Then let's be brave together." They were brave. Over the following months, they built a marriage that reflected their partnership, equal, respectful, allowing space for independence while creating room for intimacy. Cole moved his belongings into the main house, but converted a corner of it into his private office, a space that was his alone. Martha kept her morning routine of early coffee on the porch, time that was hers before the day's demands began. They worked together, ate together, slept together, but also maintained the individual identities that made them strong. Spring brought new life to the ranch. The mares foaled, producing strong, healthy babies that Martha trained with gentle patience. The cattle calved successfully, expanding the herd beyond what they dared hope. And buyers came, drawn by word that was spreading about the Hale Braddock Ranch and its quality stock. "I'll give you 200 for that bay gelding," a buyer from Denver said in May, watching Martha work one of her 3-year-olds. "He's got good conformation, nice temperament." "250, Martha countered. "He's trained for ranch work, responds to voice commands, and won't spook at cattle. That's worth the extra money." They settled on 230, and Martha felt a surge of satisfaction as she shook on the deal. This was what success felt like, not just surviving, but thriving, building something that commanded respect and fair prices. By summer, the ranch's transformation was complete. Fresh paint gleamed on the barn, new fences stretched across improved pastures. The cattle were fat and healthy, the horses well-trained and valuable, and the bank account, which had been nearly empty a year ago, now held enough to see them through several winters with room for expansion. "We did it," Cole said one evening as they surveyed their domain from the porch. "Built something real out of what was nearly lost." "We did," Martha agreed, "though I still can't quite believe it sometimes. A year ago, I was about to lose everything. Now you're a successful rancher with a thriving operation and a husband who loves you." Martha leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "Still doesn't feel completely real. Want me to pinch you? Try it and I'll put you back on that settee with another broken leg." They laughed together, the sound carrying across the rangeland where cattle grazed and horses ran free. This was what Martha had fought for all those years, not just survival, but this moment. This feeling of having built something that would last, something worth all the struggle and sacrifice and stubborn refusal to quit. In August, a letter arrived from Martha's daughter in Denver. The familiar handwriting made Martha's hands shake as she opened it, expecting the usual brief update followed by excuses about why they couldn't visit. But this letter was different. "Mother," it read, "James and I have been discussing your situation, and we're concerned about you managing such a large operation at your age. We'd like to come visit in September to discuss options for the ranch's future, including the possibility of selling and moving closer to family where you'd have support." Martha read it twice, anger building with each word. After years of absence, of ignored letters and missed holidays. Now her children wanted input because the ranch was finally successful. "What is it?" Cole asked, seeing her expression. She handed him the letter, watching his face darken as he read. When he finished, he set it down carefully, as if it might explode. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I want to write back and tell them exactly where they can put their concern and their opinions." Martha paced to the window, hands clenched. "They left me to struggle alone for 5 years. Never offered help, never visited, barely wrote. And now that things are good, they want to swoop in and make decisions about my future? Then tell them that. Tell them the ranch isn't for sale, you're not moving, and their input isn't needed or wanted." Martha turned to look at him. "Just like that?" "Just like that. Martha, this is your ranch. You built it, saved it, made it successful. Your children don't get a say in what you do with it, regardless of blood ties." She thought she might need permission, might need to justify standing firm against family pressure. But Cole was right. This was her life, her choice, her future to determine. She sat down and wrote a response that was brief and unambiguous. "Dear Sarah," she wrote, "thank you for your concern, but it's unnecessary. The ranch is thriving under my management and that of my husband Cole. We have no plans to sell or relocate. You're welcome to visit if you wish to see what I've built, but not to discuss its disposition. That decision is mine alone. Mother." Cole read it over her shoulder and nodded approvingly. Direct and clear. Perfect. They sent the letter the next day, and Martha felt a weight lift that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. For so long, she'd measured her worth against her children's expectations, their approval or lack thereof. But she didn't need their validation anymore. She had her own measure of success, built in sturdy fences and healthy livestock, and a partnership that worked. Sarah did come in September, bringing her husband James and their 2 teenage children. Martha watched them arrive with a mixture of trepidation and pride, wondering how they'd react to the changes they'd find. "Mother," Sarah said, embracing her with obvious surprise, "you look different. Good, but different. 5 years of hard work will do that to a person." Sarah's eyes took in the ranch, the painted buildings, the thriving livestock, the obvious signs of prosperity. Her expression cycled through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been respect. "This isn't what I expected," she admitted. "Your letters always sounded so desperate. I thought we'd find the place falling apart, you barely hanging on." "That was true a year ago," Martha said. "But things change. People change. Come inside, I'll introduce you to my husband." The visit was awkward, but not hostile. Sarah and James were clearly struggling to reconcile the struggling widow they'd imagined with the confident woman they found. Cole was gracious but firm, making it clear through word and action that Martha's decisions were her own, and he supported them completely. On their last evening, Sarah pulled Martha aside. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I convinced myself you were stubborn and unreasonable for staying here, that you needed rescuing from your own poor judgment. But you were right, and I was wrong. You built something remarkable." "I had help," Martha said, gesturing toward where Cole was talking with James and the children. "But yes, I proved I could do more than just survive. I proved I could thrive." "Why didn't you tell us? In your letters, you always made it sound like you were barely getting by." "Because I was, until Cole came along. And even then, I wasn't sure it would work. Success isn't something you can promise, Sarah. It's something you build, day by day, with no guarantee it'll last." Sarah hugged her, and this time there was genuine warmth in it. "I'm proud of you, Mother, and I'm sorry I wasn't here when you needed support. You're here now, that's what matters." After they left, Martha and Cole stood on the porch watching the wagon disappear into the distance. The evening was cool, autumn announcing itself in the changing light and the restlessness of the horses. "Think they'll visit again?" Cole asked. "Maybe. Or maybe they'll go back to their lives and I'll go back to being a distant obligation." Martha shrugged. "Either way, I'm fine. I don't need their approval anymore." "No, you don't. You've got something better. Your own proof of worth." The ranch continued to prosper through fall and into another winter, this one milder than the last. They expanded the horse breeding program, bought more cattle, hired a second hand to help Jake with the workload. The operation grew beyond what Martha had ever imagined possible, reputation spreading across the territory. "We've got buyers asking about next year's foals already," Martha told Cole one evening as they went over the books. "And 3 different ranchers want to send their mares to Thunder for breeding. You've built something special with the horses. People recognize quality." "We've built something special," Martha corrected. "The horses are mine, but the ranch is ours. Don't diminish your contribution." Cole pulled her close, kissing her temple. "Our ranch. Our success. Our life. I like the sound of that." As winter deepened and the year turned, Martha found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. A year and a half ago, she'd been standing on the same porch watching bank agents come to take her home, certain her story was ending. Now she stood with a husband she loved, a thriving business, and a future that stretched out full of possibility. "What are you thinking about?" Cole asked, coming to stand beside her with 2 cups of coffee. "About endings and beginnings, about how sometimes what looks like the end is really just a hard turn towards something better." "Any regrets?" Martha considered this seriously, looking out at the land that had demanded everything from her and given back more than she'd dared hope. "No," she said finally. "Not about the ranch, not about the partnership, not about marrying you. If I could go back and tell that terrified woman a year ago what was coming, I'm not sure she'd believe it." "Would you want to go back, knowing what you know now?" "Not for anything. This life, this moment, this partnership, it's exactly where I'm supposed to be." They stood together as the sun set, painting the winter sky in shades of orange and purple. The ranch spread out before them, testament to what could be built when stubbornness met opportunity, when 2 people chose to trust each other despite every reason not to. Martha Hale had spent 30 years building this ranch with her first husband, 5 years fighting to keep it alone, and 1 transformative year rebuilding it into something stronger with her second. She'd survived drought and debt, loneliness and loss, the casual cruelty of those who measured worth in youth and beauty and conventional success. But she'd done more than survive. She'd won, not by defeating others, but by refusing to accept defeat herself, by standing firm when everyone expected her to fold, by daring to hope when hope felt dangerous, by choosing partnership over isolation, love over safety, possibility over the certainty of slow decline. The ranch that had nearly been taken from her now stood as proof that second chances were real, that starting over at 55 wasn't foolish but brave, that the best chapters of a life could come long after everyone assumed the story was finished. Cole's arm came around her shoulders, and Martha leaned into him, feeling the solid reality of a future they'd built together. Not perfect, not easy, but real and earned, and entirely theirs. "We should go inside," Cole said as the temperature dropped with the setting sun. "But first, I want to say something." "What's that?" "Thank you. For taking a chance on a stranger with a crazy offer. For trusting me when you had every reason not to. For building this life with me." He turned her to face him, his hands cupping her weathered face. "You saved this ranch, Martha. But you also saved me. From a life of wandering. From giving up on the possibility of home. From dying alone without ever building something that mattered." "We saved each other," Martha said, tears threatening. "That's what partnership means." They kissed as the last light faded from the sky. 2 people who'd found each other at exactly the right moment, who'd chosen to build rather than surrender, who'd proven that courage and love and stubborn determination could transform even the most desperate circumstances into triumph. The ranch stood strong around them, no longer a burden to be carried, but a legacy to be proud of. And Martha Hale, who'd spent so many years defined by loss and struggle, could finally claim a different identity. Successful rancher, equal partner, beloved wife, and proof that the best victories in life were the ones you fought hardest to achieve. Inside the warm house, ledgers showed steady profit and plans for expansion. In the barn, horses whinnied softly as they settled for the night. In the pastures, cattle huddled against the cold but well-fed and sheltered. And in the quiet moments before sleep, Martha lay in her husband's arms and felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, completely at peace. The ranch that refused to die had done more than survive. It had thrived. And so had she.